So if you could tell the people watching this review anything, what would it be?
Don't buy $200 collector's editions or pre-order in general because you don't know if they're gonna flop or not.
Fallout 76 is a mess. And I think that's the most charitable way I could describe this game after spending 67 hours in its wasteland. No easy feat. It felt like 500 hours. Maybe it was laziness. Maybe it was rushed. Maybe it was sheer incompetence. I can't necessarily get inside people's heads. Though apparently I live rent-free in some, so I may have to do a bit of guesswork here. And I'm not in the position at this point to be charitable. So we're gonna take a look at Fallout 76. A lot of the reviews that I've seen about this game have been underwhelming, disappointing, and I feel like a lot of the issues that I took note of during my many hours of this game were going unnoticed, or no one talked about them, or spoke about them in their reviews. Kinda strange. One of the reviews I watched that was awful was by a channel called Oxhorn. Apparently he's a Fallout YouTuber. He had nothing but glowing praise for the game after 35 hours. Gosh, I wonder why. Even Mr. Matty Plays, who's a Fallout YouTuber, he titled his review, "Disappointing is an Understatement." And it's a good review. You should check it out. Give him a listen. A few days ago, I was skimming through some other Fallout 76 related content, see what people were saying, catch up on some thoughts. Came across this by Fiara the Tank Girl. Why Fallout 4 and 76 are bad Fallouts, but good games. Well, I disagreed vehemently with that. I left her this comment explaining why, and then I pointed out to her that she was contradicting her title and thumbnail in her response to me. She decided to delete my comments, or at least hide them so nobody could find them. Some people are really touchy about this game. Or maybe they're just pussies. Who knows? Can't have disagreements in the comments section. That's not what that's for. Oh well, just some things I noticed. And there might be some people out there who think that this is beating a dead horse, that I'm just adding to the pile that's already built up. But I think you'll find some things in this review that you haven't heard elsewhere. There is so much going on in Fallout 76 that doesn't work. I guarantee you that you haven't heard everything that's wrong with it, despite you thinking that maybe you have, and that doing a review is pointless. For a lot of people, a lot of die-hard Bethesda fans, a lot of Fallout fans, this has really changed their mindset into the series and the company behind the game's creation. So grab the leash and pack a sack lunch and Scooby snacks. We're going for walkies down the proverbial country road of apocalyptic West Virginia, and we are going to have a gay old time. Fallout Review.
We have always wanted to tell that story of what it would be like for you and the other characters who were first to leave the vaults. But there is one big difference with this game. It's that each of those characters is a real person.
I'm sure that'll work great for you.
As you begin the game, it opens with its only cutscene. It tells the story, and I mean that in the most loose of ways, of the denizens of Vault 76 leaving the protection of their underground bunker and venturing out into the irradiated wasteland of West Virginia. This game is a prequel of sorts. It takes place in 2102. That's 25 years after the world had its nuclear calamity. And to put that into perspective on the Fallout timeline, which lots of people don't really have stapled to the brain, the last game, Fallout 4, took place in 2287, so that's 210 years after the apocalypse. Essentially, the entire premise of Fallout 76, the reason you're doing everything that you're doing, or at least the reason that they give you, is that this vault is full of the best and brightest of America, and after the nuclear apocalypse, it's going to be your job to come out of the vault and rebuild America and help save our way of life. And it's no accident that I began this section of the review with the clip of everything being online. That's like this game's shtick. It's all online, it's multiplayer. There is no single-player element to this game. There is no way to experience Fallout 76 without the potential of running into other players or being beholden to the ping of whatever server you're placed in arbitrarily, or the constant fear of server disconnects. You can't pause the game. The world goes on with or without you. So I think it's fair to begin the review by addressing how these things mix, how you have the narrative component of the game and the story it's trying to tell, with the fact that the game is always online, and the restrictions and hoops that one has to jump through, design-wise, when you're putting those things together. If you're going to have a game that's always online, there should be some kind of a common goal that players are trying to accomplish in terms of what the story is. And the idea for Fallout 76 is that it's your duty as a blue-blooded, God-fearing, capitalist-loving American to restore order and rebuild the wasteland of West Virginia. Which you'll quickly forget because, like the previous Fallout game, and others, it's kind of just about you. That's what people do in Fallout. They collect weapons and armor and special little things and trinkets. They have a little den or house they spruce up with looted goodies, and they scrounge and scavenge. And for a game about survivors of a nuclear apocalypse who should be banding together to rebuild the broken world around them, you never really get that feeling. Everybody's just sort of out there doing their own thing. I won't get into how they could have made it work. Well, maybe later I will. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But Fallout 76 essentially plays like a free-for-all. There's a bunch of people exploring, bouncing around from place to place to resupply their little stock of adhesive and loose screws and turpentine. Doesn't feel like anybody I met was on my team. Even though they should all be on my team. Not that it feels like they're my enemy. We'll get to PvP later. But they chose a story and setting that just doesn't really gel. Once you start thinking about it, for the tiniest of seconds, it all starts to fall apart. You and all of these other people have been stuck inside this underground bunker for the last 25 years together. And when you spawn into the game with your newly made character, it looks the part. It looks like a celebration, almost in Fallout's tongue-in-cheek style of, gee golly gosh, look at how naive and happy everybody is to go out into the wasteland kind of way. There's nobody there. This vault, your home for the last 25 years, is empty. And the only thing approaching another living soul are these floating Mr. Handy robots with the same voice between all of them. And what a strange way to begin an online-only game. If this was a single-player game, there would be, a game Bethesda fucking gave a shit about. There would be characters here. There would be NPCs that were humans. There would be young children curious about what was outside the vault that they'd lived in their whole lives. There'd be older generations who would have the knowledge in their heads of the pre-war world, and even people like the player who probably recall those days to some degree, but are about to embark into this strange new world fraught with danger. And you would know each of them by name, because you spent the last quarter century locked up in a glorified safety box together. And if this were a game that Bethesda gave a shit about, you would explore the wasteland and watch how it changed them. Watched how these fellow vault dwellers coped with this dangerous, strange new world. How the elderly tried to learn how to accept that this wasteland was once their home, that a cataclysm engulfed it, and that things can never ever go back to the way that they were. I'm probably starting to ramble a bit, whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is that the idea of a Fallout game set with the opening of a vault and the early period following, I guess, its potential habitability in the wasteland is a very neat one that would have been a perfect game that isn't this game. Instead, you walk out of the vault in the most unceremonious, boring vault openings of all games, and that's kind of that. And the game comes in with some contrived reason why you can't just turn around and go back in. because that would make sense, but we can't have that in this online game. I mean, you can't walk back into Vault 76, ever. Once you leave at the beginning, you can never go back inside. It's closed, and it makes no sense at all. It just seems odd that if you're supposed to go out and restore the world, you can't come back inside the vault where it's safe and there's clean food and water and power and medical care and clean beds. There's some terminal entry about how they need to essentially grow tough spines and they can't rely on the vault and stuff like that, but it doesn't really make sense. I mean, if you only have a very finite supply of human people leaving a vault, you want to keep them safe and well-fed and healthy so that they can carry out their job, and that they would be very precious commodities. Also, Vault 76 doesn't have any experiment to it. At least, not to my understanding. It's just a vault that was made to open like normal. There's no cloning or psychological tampering or human experimentation. It's just a vault. And that's not very interesting. It could have been. Instead of all the potential of some interesting, cool story with memorable characters and dialogue and choices, it was all removed so the game could be always online. And these things aren't mutually exclusive, but I guess Bethesda thought one was far more important than the other. And maybe I should give Bethesda some leeway here. They wanted an always online multiplayer Fallout game, but I can't help wonder what was sacrificed in order to do that. And why would they do it at all? Who exactly was clamoring for a PvP in a Fallout game? I mean, the last thing that I've ever thought about when I've played a Fallout game, be it 3, New Vegas, 4, last thing that I've had on my mind was, man, I can't wait for another player to walk into my game and fuck it all up. I'm sure there's a fair amount of people who wanted a co-op mode with a PvE focus. I kind of prefer to go it alone myself, but I wouldn't mind if I could turn it off and I could enjoy my Fallout as what it's always been, a single-player game that was really immersive. But if I had the option to have some friends with me and we tackled the wasteland together without strangers mucking around in it as well, that would be cool. I would be down with that. But now it's almost like every other player I see ruins the immersion when it's supposed to be the other way around. So the point I'm trying to make is that from the get-go here, if you're trying to have a game that's always online and there's always people and you're all working together for something, when I've booted up the game, and I've done this with multiple characters just to see, it plops you in a server, and for the most part, you'll be the only person in the server doing the one thing of leaving the vault, because it's a one-way trip. You can't go back. So you're surrounded by this empty vault, and it's supposed to be this big thing, but there's no one around. And one of the biggest complaints I have about this game is how lonely it feels, and from the very first moments I have control over my character, I feel alone. The game tells me that I'm one of America's best and brightest, and I have to team up with all of my fellow vault dwellers, and we all go out and rebuild the wasteland together, but all that's around are me, some robots, and my immense disappointment. The in-game story, which I'll only briefly talk about because I'm only going to give as much effort as Bethesda did. Essentially, there's an overseer who doesn't even have a character model, by the way, because you never meet her, but she's the main quest of the game. And I use the quotations around the words main quest liberally, is that you are to follow her path, because she's dicking around in the woods and you have to go do stuff with her. Before you get to leave the vault, there's people who are out in the wasteland. There's a group of goody two-shoes people called the Responders, and they want to help people and build the wasteland up and keep everyone safe and fed, and they're all dead. There's a faction of raiders, that go around raiding stuff, stealing, and they're all dead. And there's the Brotherhood of Steel, who collect tech and break the Fallout lore, and they're all dead. Then there's the Enclave, remnants of the old government. They're all dead. Everyone's dead. They're all dead. No one's alive. You come across their bodies, and you can't take the armor off them, which is neat. And you come across everybody, and they're all dead. It's like you had a wasteland full of factions that had their own objectives and goals, and you pop in after, gosh, somebody else's Fallout game is over and done. But they fucked up with the main story, so everyone died. And there's no one here to care about or be invested in. The only people who you interact with are robots. Robots are the traders, the bartenders, the little floaty thingies. They're the gardeners. Look at this picture. There's like 15 robots in this picture. And a dead one. Like, what is this, Bethesda? How does it feel so lifeless? Like Pennington, who gives you your first main quest thingy. There are no people. Fallout 76 is completely without dialogue. There is no dialogue that the player makes in this game. It is all completely passive. You are told to do this by a robot, and you go do it. And that's that. You can't decline or ask for more information. You can't engage with them in any way. You are told to do things, and your character has no choice but to either do them or just not ever get around to it. And since there's no living people in the Wasteland at this point, apart from other players, all of the game's stories and lore and stuff comes delivered through holotapes and computer terminals, and some of them are just flat out bad.
Night Moreno. Night. God. Grant here. Are you okay? Scorch. Freaking everywhere. Next coord's acquired. Alpha Zulu. Alpha Zulu 13. Confirm. AZ-13. Are you okay? It's crazy over here, Grant. Scorched everywhere.
Fall back. Slow and steady. Into the killing ground.
Alpha Zulu 13. If we don't make it, that may be the end zone.
Yeah, Oxhorn, that's riveting storytelling. You feel like a visitor passing through. You have no reason to really be here. So when people say there's no NPCs, they're not really correct, technically. There are NPCs, but they're all robots that you just listen to and do their bidding. They're glorified quest dispensers that don't require your consent. And I think it's important to kind of start the review with this in mind. It helps to set the tone for the wasteland that you're constantly in. When it comes to games like Fallout and Elder Scrolls, the world that you're in is almost like a character in and of itself. I'll talk about the environment, Appalachia, later on, but I just don't want it to go unspoken that I think that there's a huge disconnect between what you do in this game and what your character's supposed to be doing in terms of the game's story. In Fallout 4, they had the same problem. You're supposed to be frantically looking for your son that your character's supposed to care about a great deal, but at the same time, they throw all of these cool, nifty locations and a whole brand new world to explore, and you want to go look in every little nook and cranny that you could possibly find, and you want to get all the duct tape and all the screws, and you want to make your character and all that stuff. So you've got that disconnect. Your character should be wanting to do this, but you as the player want to do something else. So you have the main quest that's always there, something about some evil fungus from beneath the surface that these scorch beasts will bring with them that infects the people up in the wasteland, ultimately killing them. And that's kind of the story. You have to stop that, or not really stop it. Kill a scorch beast that's doing it, but it doesn't amount to anything, and the quests are dull, and they're boring, and you never feel like you should do it because you feel no connection to the world, and everybody's dead, so you want to know what you're really doing this for, or who's around to care about if you succeed or fail. I didn't even finish the main quest. I just found an article that told me what happened, and I'm kind of glad I didn't waste my time. It was just one silly mission after the next silly mission, and I just wanted to explore. I wanted to look for things and do stuff and check the environment out. Since there's no dialogue and no people to interact with, you don't feel like you're ever really doing anything for anybody except for yourself. So when you play Fallout 76 and you don't feel like you want to do it, you never feel any kind of encouragement to go out of your way to do anything for the world. There's no sense of permanence, no sense of impact. Every once in a while, you'll come across other people's little camps, little player bases, essentially, and you'll walk in, you'll use their stuff to manage your inventory and change your weapons, maybe repair your gear. But you know that no matter how much work and time and effort they put into their house, I never was really interested in building one for myself. And once they leave the server, it's gone. Once you leave the server, your camp it disappears along with you. Like it's just not there. There was never any sign that you existed in this world. You essentially create blueprints that will save all of your stuff so you can put it up later somewhere else, but it's like you're carrying a little magical briefcase house. It doesn't permanently exist in Appalachia as a place you can always go back to, that's always there. Whenever you want to move it, you just pick it up and place it in a new spot, providing that the buggy landscape allows you to, and you just go on your way. And that's that. Compare that to previous Fallouts where you would have like a special place that you liked more than anything else. A little house, your home, your hovel, your little den, and you would always go back and you'd bring your stuff to your lair, and you'd stuff it in the fridges and boxes, and you'd add it to your collection. Coming across the bases and the camps of other players, though, it didn't add to the world. In fact, it took me away from it. It's like coming across another human being's project, and it wasn't something that was in-universe, and you were always aware of that. Multiple times, sometimes when I would come across a player's base, I would find their dropped loot of items that they couldn't carry or were useless to them. Sometimes tens of thousands of useful materials, insanely voluminous stacks of ammunition, special legendary items, a hospital's worth of chems and healing equipment, and they would just drop it. Coming across these massive, discarded stores of materials directly clashed with the idea that we were supposed to be in an apocalyptic wasteland where resources were scarce. And the idea that you're supposed to be surviving and rebuilding a nuclear wasteland would imply that there's some kind of a scarcity of things like medical equipment and food, yet coming across things like this, it only served to pull me out of the game further. The game's telling me that all of these other players in the server, they're members of the same vault as me emerging from the world, but whenever I find them, their creations, whenever I see them in the wasteland, I don't get the sense that they're supposed to even be here. That we're not on the same team, that we treat everybody that we meet with incredible indifference. And that was by far the most common reaction that I got from other players that I met. Complete and total indifference. Now, there's not particularly a reason why you would really want to cooperate with other people, especially strangers. There's just no reason for it. Fallout 76, even though it's designed to be always online in a multiplayer game, I never felt the desire to want to play this game with other people. I felt like they would get in the way of me exploring the world that Bethesda crafted. Bethesda set up a world whose story is only told to me through passive ways. I have to listen to a holotape. I have to read a computer terminal. And if I'm playing with other people who aren't really interested in that, and I don't blame them because for the most part it's very uninteresting and just, you feel no desire to want to learn about people because you have no emotional investment in anything. If you're the guy in the group who wants to learn about all that stuff, then you're going to slow everybody down because they have to hang out while you listen to holotapes. And while you're trying to pay attention, they're chattering about this and that, and you're sitting at a computer terminal reading every entry, and they just want to fucking get on with it. The immersion and investment aspects of Fallout games in the past are practically non-existent in this game. I've never found it harder for me to get absorbed into a world than with Fallout 76. And that isn't to say that it wasn't possible and that it didn't happen. It was just more difficult. Another aspect of Fallout 76, since we're somewhat on the topic of it being an online always game, is the fact that there's PvP. And I don't think PvP was really something that was requested in large numbers. I imagine a lot of people wanted to maybe have a cooperative mode where it was them and some buddies in a server of their own where they could tackle the world, maybe make the difficulty a little higher, challenge themselves, all work towards some kind of a common goal. I never really got the impression that a lot of people wanted to have a Fallout game that they were familiar with, where there was a potential of another player waltzing into their game and fucking around with their stuff. And while Fallout 76 does have PvP, it is one of the most poorly thought out and implemented aspects of the game that there are, and that's actually saying something, considering how much this game gets wrong. PvP, I won't spend too much time on it because chances are you won't spend too much time with it, should you ever get this game. Here's how PvP works. A player decides he wants to attack another player. The aggressor pulls out his weapons and attacks the victim, but the damage that's inflicted will be severely reduced to the point of near impotence. So, until the victim decides to retaliate, the aggressor is basically just wasting time and ammunition. But should the victim return fire, damage will then be dealt as normal. So this means that the defender has a gigantical, massive, large, big advantage over his aggressor all the time. If somebody attacks you, you can heal yourself, get into position, pull out your best gun, get in close, take some chems to boost your stats, and then your attacks will be the first to do normal damage. If a player is actually killed by another player, they can be revived or finished off. And if a player dies, the only lootable stuff that they drop and that can be taken from their body are just the junk items. So those are the materials that are used to build things and craft them, upgrade items, all that jazz. You cannot lose your weapons or armor or aid items or anything else, only junk. Essentially, PvP is one big waste of time, and in my 50 or so hours of this game, I only had 2 PvP interactions at all, and neither of them would be what I would call traditional PvP. One time I found somebody's area where they had a base set up, and I walked inside and, waved, and they waved back, and we didn't say anything. And they had a porta potty inside, and so I opened up the porta potty, and I got inside, and I sat down. I'm inside a porta potty, sitting down, ha ha ha. Well, I decided I would go ahead and take a screenshot. Well, my dumbass forgot that left alt and F1 are my keyboard's bindings for taking a screenshot with Shadowplay. Left alt is also the melee button, so I meleeed the inside of his porta potty. Now, what that means is that counts as me attacking his building, which made me a wanted man on the server, which meant that anybody could now attack me for freebies, and they would get caps for it, because I accidentally meleeed the inside of somebody's porta potty. I was a bad dog. It didn't take very long, even though this guy didn't care. He obviously knew I wasn't attacking him, but other players on the server who were much higher level than me fast traveled close to me, and then I was killed in one shot. I was around level 30 at the time, and people who were level 100, 120 appeared and were able to take me out in a single shot. I didn't feel too bad about it though, because if somebody's level 120 in Fallout 76, even though they killed me, at least I can walk away with the satisfaction that I know what the inside of a vagina feels like. PvP, honestly, I don't know why they even bothered in this game. It doesn't make narrative sense. If you're all supposed to be from Vault 76, and you're all supposed to be cooperating to rebuild the wasteland, it makes absolutely zero sense that anybody would PvP with somebody else, because in the game's eyes, you all know each other. You grew up together. Ideally, cooperation is the best tool to survive. And it's not exactly like this world is scarce for resources. My other PvP encounter I'll get into later, but save these 2 examples in 50 hours worth of time of meeting people, never was I fired upon. Not a single time. I met groups of people who probably could have killed me if I had wanted to engage them in PvP, but that never happened. Whenever I met another player, for the most part, we just went on our separate ways. We didn't interact. Maybe they would give a little hello emote or shake their mouse back and forth, but that was it. In all my time of Fallout 76, I only killed 1 player, and it was an accident.
He just likes to be sent.
This is a fun game, JP. This is a fun, riveting video game. Aren't you?
Tommy, you called Bethesda poison. From
Bethesda, he said the N-word.
I'll tell Bethesda you said the N-word.
No, JP! I'm coming, JP! Oh fuck, JP's fucking dead. Oh my god, I shot a Vertibot and it landed on a poor level 8 player. Oh my god, JP, I am so sorry. I had no idea that would happen. That was a total accident. That could have landed on anybody. And it just happened to. I'm gonna take your stuff, but I didn't mean for that to happen. I'm so sorry, but I'm not sorry that I took all your stuff. It's a tough world. Get used to it. Every once in a while, I would just stick around and maybe follow someone around to see what they were doing, but all that meant is that we would just be shooting at enemies together, and that's what we would have done anyway. Now there's just 2 of us shooting at enemies, not 1 of us. In 50 hours of playing this game, there was only 1 instance where I managed to find some stranger, another player, and actually help them with something in a way that could be construed as cooperation. There was a location that we were both at that had a locked door to get into the facility here. I was able to jump on props and doodads to get inside, unlock the door with a terminal, which would then allow it to be accessed from the outside, while he was still trying to jump up on the stuff that I had jumped on. But I unlocked it, and I went back outside, and I found him, still trying to jump up on the little doohickeys, and I got his attention because I had unlocked the door from the inside so that he could come in. And all of this was done without any in-game voice communication, which kind of made it a little special. Even the little thank me, he did the little thank me thumbs up, right? Don't know who this guy was, he didn't know who I was, but that was kind of cool. And it made me think of what this game could have had in terms of its potential. You might be asking, though, why we didn't just talk to each other in game. And that's a pretty fair question, and let me explain to you why. You see, Bethesda, in their infinite wisdom, decided to sell this fully priced $60 always-online multiplayer gaming experience without a push-to-talk function. The game launched with 2 options. Either your mic was turned off and you could not transmit voice to anybody in the game, or your mic was always on, always transmitting your voice. If you were talking to somebody in Discord, or if your cat jumped on your lap and you told Mr. Whiskers he had to go find somewhere else to sit for a while, then all of that would be transmitted to anyone around you inside of Fallout 76. The game launched without proper 21:9 support, it launched without a field of view slider, it launched without a push-to-talk function. The game was originally tied to 60 FPS because in Bethesda's magical world, game speed is tied to your FPS. And while many of these things have been fixed, some of them less than a week after launch, it does make me wonder, what the hell were they thinking? What kind of incompetent company is this who's pushing out these kinds of products? These are mistakes that I wouldn't expect to see from most indie developers. And it baffles me that since it took them only less than a week to fix these issues, why they wouldn't wait when first impressions are so important. But if you've been keeping up with the news the last, however many weeks since this game is released, then you probably know that Bethesda's reaping what they sow. I think you guys get the gist of things. I've been rambling long enough. Let's get into something more interesting like the gameplay. Oh boy, now we're done talking about all that boring stuff. Now we can talk about the fun things like the gameplay. I promise you, everything you've heard is true. It is awful. First and foremost, Fallout 76 is a first-person shooter. This is like the building block upon which everything that you do is built on. Bethesda is a AAA development team, and they have more money than God, and they have a lot of experience underneath their belt, especially when it comes to making first-person shooters. And I hate to pull the current year argument, but it is 2018, and we do have access to a certain level of technology when it comes to our video games. So why does this game play like garbage? As far as first-person shooters go, Fallout 76 is one of the worst I have ever played, and I don't say that for hyperbole. Fallout 76 has one of the most unresponsive, clunky, cumbersome, clumsy, unintuitive, and frustrating gameplay that I've ever played. It legitimately surprised me how bad it is. Here, let's take Overwatch as an example. Love it or hate it, it's an extremely responsive game. When you press a button, shit happens. When you jump or use abilities, when you aim, everything from moving to shooting happens like that. No waiting, no lag, it's precise. You're never frustrated by the game being unable to translate what you want to happen into the game when you press buttons. Let's take Dirty Bomb, RIP. Dirty Bomb was a game that has tons of problems, but what kept me invested in that game for over 900 hours and over the span of years was the fact that it was so responsive. Whenever I wanted my character to do something, it was done immediately. I jumped, reloaded, double jump, backflip, front flip, ran, sprinted, reload, canceled, shot, swapped weapons, used abilities. It was all instant. What I wanted to have happen on screen happened on screen with no delay. Almost everything about the actual playing of the game in Fallout 76 is done poorly. There's issues, there's problems, and they cause frustration, and they make me not want to keep playing the game. And if the gameplay makes me not want to play the game, you done fucked up. Combat in general is a mess, and it's actually a downgrade, a step backwards from Fallout 4. If they had just literally copied it in its entirety and put it into this game, it would be better. But they managed to take a system that was okay and make it bad. I would say it's about 3 categories of different things that come together to make the combat and gameplay in Fallout 76 such an immense mess. Let's start with the controls of the game, how it responds to player touch. As mentioned before, combat in Fallout 76 is so bad, firstly due to how you interact with your weapons and how your controls are represented through the actions of your character in-game. Or perhaps better stated, how your inputs are not translated into actions by your character in-game. A lot of this game will be spent using slow-firing weapons, often with low capacities. So you'll want to have as many of your shots connect as possible because there's a fair amount of time in between your next shot, and there's a fair amount of time reloading. Weapons like hunting rifles, which are bolt actions, revolvers, such as the pipe revolver you've seen in that clip, and shotguns. I've played a lot of first-person shooters over the years, and it's really worthy of note in this game that you do a lot of reloading, and you take a lot of damage while you're reloading because of reasons we'll get to soon. Fallout 76 is just a terrible shooter, and this game is a first-person shooter. It's an awful first-person shooter. What it is, more than anything else, it's terrible at. Remember earlier I was talking about how Overwatch and Dirty Bomb are fun in a way because they're so responsive with the controls and the input? Fallout is the opposite of that. I don't know if there's a technical name for it, but there's a lot of dead time in this first-person shooter. That is, when you tell your character to do something like sprint, reload, shoot, scope or unscope, jump, change from fucking first to third person, there's a lot of times when these actions shouldn't get in the way of one another. For instance, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to change my view from first to third person while I'm doing anything else. But the game doesn't let you do it. You'll spend a great deal of time using a hunting rifle in this game because it shoots 308 rounds. The game throws these rounds at you, and it's a fairly potent round. So if you've played this game, you already know this. If you haven't played this game, I'll explain. You get to know things like, what's a good example? Whenever you are scoped in with a hunting rifle and you shoot, you cannot unscope until you have worked the action of the bolt and you are ready for your next shot. This is very, very important in a game where enemies are often chasing after you, and you move slower when you are scoped in. In a lot of other games, this isn't an issue because whenever you let your finger off the button for scoping, you unscope and you move as normal. But you obviously want to move as quickly as you can away from enemies that are generally chasing you. And it's just frustrating when this happens. When your character is scoped in and you're stuck staring down the scope of your rifle while you're working the bolt. It's little things like this that all add up. A lot of times you can't swap between weapons or select different kinds of grenades if you're reloading or if you're doing something else. The responsiveness of sprinting, which is not a hold by the way, it's toggle. This is a game with toggle sprint. It just doesn't work, it seems, half the time. When I want to be sprinting, I have to press it, hope it works, and sometimes it does work, but I don't think it works, and then I accidentally end up hitting the button again and I cancel a sprint that I've already made. Here, let's start going over some clips here, because I think that showing is better than just telling. The game makes you frustrated, and I hate to use the whole "it's current year" argument, but it is 2018. We have a certain level of technology available to make video games, and Bethesda clearly has the money for it, and we have an uncountable number of examples of competent first-person shooters now that you can draw from. Many of them from much smaller studios like Fat Shark or, Splash Damage. I have to just state it plainly. Fallout 76 is a bad first-person shooter game. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say it does feel worse in a lot of ways than Fallout 3. Since there are so many different, crazy, awful, horrible things about this game and how it plays out, we're just gonna go through a bunch of the clips that I've saved, and I'm gonna tell you why it's awful. I don't know how to structure this. I don't even know where to begin. We're just gonna have a fun time. A lot of suffering and pain and tears went into getting all of these clips together. So I hope that as you sit there, listening to me explain and show you how terrible this game is, I hope that you can get some enjoyment out of it. Because in some weird way, maybe that'll make it all worthwhile. As you've probably noticed from watching this video play, the enemies in Fallout 76 are not exactly bright. Enemies in Bethesda games for a while, they've been typically, I guess you could call them the flat earthers of the video game world in terms of problem solving, but I've never seen it this bad. And I give much less wiggle room for charity here because there's such an immense reuse of assets. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. Just make no mistake, enemies in Fallout 76 are fucking retarded. At least that's one way to describe them. As I played the game, I couldn't help but wonder to myself if it was a limitation of their cognitive function, or if it was just the fact that their animation set was so limited in terms of mobility. Enemies don't have an animation for crossing over knee-high objects or waist-high objects. There's no vaulting. The tiniest, most innocuous of obstacles presents a major pathway blocking problem for the enemies of Appalachia. And that's a pretty big deal because a vast percentage of the foes you meet in Fallout are melee-based. They're super mutants with hammers or radioactive dogs with teeth that gnash. And pour one out for my fellow canine quadruped brothers just trying to get by in the wasteland. But there's no animations for vaulting or climbing or jumping gaps or just generally traversing terrain that's easily exploitable by you, the player. A huge portion, arguably a majority, of Fallout's enemies are exploitable. You can essentially kill enemies with no sense of danger or any chance of failure. They present no opposition to you other than just slowing you down and expending your ammunition. And I think the reason that this is such a big frustration for me, and why I think this game seems so lazy, is that if you're going to sell this game as a full $60 title, and at the same time reuse so many of the assets, then I'd hope that you'd take those assets that you had before and improve on them. I mean, if you want to have some same death claws, sure, fine, okay. I dug the death claws in Fallout 4, the way they looked and, behaved, but holy shit, do something to them that's new, add to them. And that's why I can fight a Deathclaw and jump over this tiny gap in the road and it can't follow me. This massive, fearsome, terrible creature that should strike fear into the hearts of all players and beasts alike. It's been effectively thwarted into harmlessness by a little gap that even fucking Billy the Fridge could bound across if he was on crutches. Here, Here's an excellent example. This boss here is a Grafton monster. It had some easily avoidable ranged attacks, but the bulk of its damage comes from its melee attacks. That means you can do things like stand inside of a building's doorway and just shoot it until it dies, even though there's another player right now out in the street who's also shooting at him. He won't swap between the targets. He'll just stand there and let me kill him, even though he could just turn around and attack the player shooting it in the back. Another example of this is this clip here, where I easily defeat it because of this mostly buried log that wouldn't even be a concern to a Mazda Miata driver drinking coffee from an open cup. This is the kind of unassuming obstacle that will effectively render what should be this dangerous, nasty, terrible beast that's supposed to be challenging completely harmless, laughable even. This is the kind of stuff that makes me just sigh in frustration at this game. It's just a joke. Let's take the ghouls as an example. They're pretty much total reused models and movements from Fallout 4, and I had issues from how they jerked around and sped up in that game. And even that's ported over. Ghouls move suddenly at lightning fast speeds, and they lunge and move in these odd ways that are frustrating to deal with, but you'll fight a lot of ghouls, who are exclusively melee enemies, and despite their speed and agility, they can't clamber up onto objects like cars or vault over little obstacles that are knee or waist high, so you can jump on cars, and the ghouls cannot reach you. This is the prime strategy for killing them. Also, find car, jump on car, win battle. They lack the animation necessary to get onto the car or to lean over and reach at you. They can't do anything. Just don't end up accidentally killing yourself with a chain reaction. That would be, a slight inconvenience. You get all your health back. In this clip here that I got recently, I attack a Grafton monster in White Springs. It doesn't run toward me. It actually seems to flee to another location where I have to chase it. And that in and of itself was a little confusing, but when I finally kept up to it, it stuck on a small ledge, making it an easy kill, and I could take out what's essentially supposed to be a boss monster, sometimes even used for world events or server events, all by myself. There doesn't seem to be like a trigger in place where if an enemy is trying to reach you after a set amount of time, it doesn't do something or perform some action or change its behavior in any way. But the AI pathing issue isn't restricted to just ghouls and boss enemies like this monster here. Pretty much every enemy has this issue. Super mutants, scorched, various beast and wild critters. If an enemy does not have a ranged attack, it can be easily rendered harmless. So that's some quality game design right there, Bethesda. It reeks of laziness and poor construction. It's like a joke, but you don't laugh at it, you just roll your eyes. Enemies, like the player, have levels as well. And in theory, a higher a level a creature is, the more dangerous they are generally. And I'd struggle to really call this a rule in Fallout 76. Enemy levels are extremely inconsistent with the danger they pose to the player. Some enemies at high levels are insanely powerful, and some enemies at the same level are much, much, much weaker. There's just such inconsistency, it's hard to really nail it down, because the difficulty of enemies that the player has to face and how tough they are and how much damage they do, it's important stuff. The enemies shouldn't be so weak that it's unengaging and boring, and they can't be so difficult and unstoppable that the player feels hopeless and gets frustrated. And this is another incredible failure of Fallout 76. The level scaling is abysmal. A ghoul that's at your level can maul you to death with ease, while scorched that are 10 levels above you pose no threat at all. Super mutants that are at my level getting damaged by weapons that are also near my level are bullet sponges. I think that some of the most deadly strategies of enemies in Fallout 76 relies on me dying of starvation or old age by the time the battle is actually finished. If I'm at level 40, and my weapon is level 40, and I come across level 40, 45 enemies, I shouldn't be pouring magazine after magazine of rounds into them in order to get the kill. Here at the gate of White Springs, I angered this Assaultron moments after leveling up to 44, and while the enemy was only 2 levels ahead of me, the ammunition I was expending, it just wasn't worth the damage output, and I barely made it out alive when it just tapped me once. Part of the big pull of a game like Fallout 76 is the exploration of the world, and each location generally is populated by a certain type of enemy, scorched, super mutants, etc. But in Fallout 76, the same location can have different enemy types depending on the visit. So, the first time I found the Ranger District office, it was full of robots, Protectrons, and Sentry bots. They weren't much higher leveled than I was, but they destroyed me, ripped me to shreds. The Protectrons were moderately spongy, but not very damaging, but the Sentry bot was just unstoppable. Fighting it was hopeless. There was nothing I could do. I gave up, and when I returned at a later date, the same location was populated instead by Scorched, one of the most numerous, weakest enemies in the game, essentially replacements for the Raiders. I slaughtered them without a second thought. Didn't break a sweat, didn't come close to it. Cakewalk, no problem. Interestingly though, as I was using the workbench in the area after all the foes had been killed, all of a sudden the enemies in the location respawned around me because another player had arrived. And the Scorched were much tougher now, easily 30 levels above me, because the player that had come closer was himself much higher leveled than I was. I mean, at least I think so. This is what I attribute this phenomenon to. It's Fallout 76. At this point, I'm willing to believe any crazy theory that pops into my head. It very well may be true. There are countless Reddit you can count them. There's a lot of Reddit threads asking how the level scaling works. Why are enemies so difficult now and they weren't a moment ago? What is the cause of all this? What's the system? And as I browse the threads, sometimes I get contradictory answers, and I don't really know which one it is. What I've read is that the first player in an area will set the enemy levels, though I've also heard that it's the highest leveled player in the area, which is why, depending on the server you're placed in, you can consistently find enemies that shit down your throat or enemies that all pretty much die in a single shot. What I noticed about the game and reading all this stuff on Reddit is that up until around level 25 or so, the game was shockingly easy. Almost every enemy died in a single hit. Maybe they took 2 hits if they were really tough. But they did very little damage to me, and my deaths were so rare that I probably only died a couple times in my first 20 levels, and I think one of them was just me experimenting with fall damage. The game was a joke in terms of its difficulty. I regularly told people that I was bored out of my minds because everything I just melted. The game was shockingly easy, and I told everybody that this was a big problem with it. And what I've heard anecdotally from other people seems to confirm that I'm definitely not the only one who had this issue. So as a result of the incredible easiness of this game for the first 25 or so levels, which it takes a fair amount of time to get through, I chose perks when I leveled up that weren't combat based. More on that later. So when level 25 to 30 came around, all of a sudden I started noticing a shift. Enemies became much more difficult as I explored more and more and more. The problem was terrible in some areas. I was actively dying over and over because enemies constantly were at way higher levels than I could just deal with. My numbers just weren't there and there was nothing I could do. You can't really outskill a lot of enemies in this game. You just can't generate the numbers you need to whittle down the enemy. The piles of ammunition that I had been acquiring were being eaten away by bullet sponge enemy after bullet sponge enemy that would just tear me apart. Though oftentimes I would simply stand in front of an enemy, as we had this war of attrition, their high level giving them an incredible resilience to all damage, but their weak attacks barely did anything to me. We just sat there, like a couple of retards humping a brass doorknob. Where combat was once a breeze and I could at least explore as I wished, it had become a gamble. Locations where once I cleared without any problem could now spawn enemies that were just unstoppable. Eventually, my stupid ass learned that it was better to just let enemies kill you, oftentimes. And then after that, you just return to your body moments later, gather up your junk. Did I say later? Later to gather up your junk, because junk is the only thing you drop when you die. And if there's one thing I'm not unused to, it's dropping my junk. See there, you'd know I would make a crude remark around that comment. So I hope you're satisfied. And I know you are, because that's generally what happens when I drop my junk. See, we'll go all day. The hits just keep coming. The point is that you might as well just let enemies kill you, because there's no real sense wasting your healing items on a lost cause. If your health is low, just let them kill your character and respawn. Or hell, if your health is low, blow up a car next to you and just respawn and run back to it. Your health, it's filled when you die. It's great. It's a wonderful system. It works excellently. It definitely isn't abusable or exploitable. Death isn't just an inconvenience in Fallout 76. Sometimes it is welcome. I embrace gladly the healing properties that is dying. Anyway, Jesus Christ, my refrigerator is loud. Fuck it, it's staying in. Since enemy levels will be based on the highest player around you, if that player isn't you, then you might be in some trouble. The game for me has been consistently more enjoyable the less I see of other human beings. Kind of like life in general. And for a multiplayer, always online game, that's odd. That's not how things should be. In Guild Wars 2, it's good to have other players around you. There were quests and events that take this into consideration. You want other players to be around. You get more goodies. There are more enemies to kill. But Fallout 76 doesn't seem like any thought at all was put in how to balance out the difficulty for a world where players of every level will be wandering around in. You can't choose your server. So depending on the players on the server you share and their levels and where they are, your enjoyment of the game will vary greatly. Enemies around the starting area seem to be capped for low levels though. That's consistent, I've noticed, and that makes sense. Though that does seem to be the extent of good game design when it comes to the level scaling in this game. I've had people tell me that they've stopped playing and their friends have stopped playing because of how little ammo they eventually had, essentially scrounging for it because of how bullet-spingy enemies became after the feast of Fallout's early game shifted and the hours carried on. Damage is damage, numbers are numbers, and as far as I know, there's no percentage-based system or buff-debuff when it comes to two characters of multiple different levels attacking the same enemy. Bethesda doesn't seem to have put much work or thought into making a world that players of vastly differing levels will share, because they have to share it together. And as a result, the inconsistent gameplay and the massive difficulty spikes are just another part of the game's terrible design, and many on the Fallout 76 Reddit are trying to find out just why it seems to be broken. Oh, here's a fun one. When I'm going through the Reddit, I've found multiple instances of players noting that high-level characters can follow around low-level characters, which makes the enemy spawn at high levels, and that'll kill the weak players, and then the weak players can be looted without the wanted penalty of PvP. This has happened personally to me, in fact. Somebody followed me around, which made really difficult enemies spawn, and they massacred me, and they just looted my body, and I lost all my resources. So that was fun. It's an RPG. You can roleplay as a dick. Once, while at Harper's Ferry, I was asked to join a team with some random player about 30 levels above me, and I went ahead and said, fuck it, I accepted. I followed him around in his fancy power armor as he massacred enemies by hitting them with a pointed stick. I barely did any damage by comparison. I just made sure to hit each enemy once or twice with my guns, so I got the XP, and then he just hit them, and they died. And once, while at the bottom of the top of the world, that's an odd sentence, there was extremely deadly mosquitoes and rad scorpions down there, and they were so bullet spongy and frustrating to damage that I just rushed up into the tower itself. And in the tower, there were easily dispatched Scorched, and they all died in a couple shots, didn't pose any problems at all. And multiple times I found this to be the case, where you'll have level 1 to 5 Scorched enemies in a location, and then you take a short walk down the road to the next location, just a couple stones throws away, and enemies were level 68 legendaries that massacred me. So, you know, that was fun. That seems reasonable. Issues with the behavior of enemies, it's not just limited to what I've mentioned so far. When it comes to the AI itself, enemies don't really show much difference in the way that they actually behave in combat. Enemies like robots and super mutants and mole miners and the Scorched that often use ranged attack show essentially no difference from one another in terms of what they do, their coordination, their in-combat behavior. Scorched have a rudimentary, occasional impulse to take cover and peer out of it intermittently to shoot at you, That's the only exclusive behavior that the 3 quote-unquote intelligent enemy types make. The others simply move into a position, usually out in the open and far away from cover, and fire towards the player, often standing still. Enemies in this game act like they know their only purpose is to be killed. They show no sense of self-preservation. They don't flee or run away, and they will not become discouraged when their allies are decimated by a superior leveled player. And what's odd is that I've seen super mutants who have no ranged weapon pick up the weapons from the bodies of their fallen comrades and use them, but then they'll just stand there in the open and be shot. And by stand, I mean their feet are planted on the ground, they are nice and still so the player can headshot them. Even as they take heavy damage, they won't move. Sometimes, when the player is positioned in a spot the enemies can't reach, enemies will flee, though this is rare, right? They will immediately return towards the player once the player is reachable again, which makes me believe that this isn't actually the enemy, like, fleeing to preserve their lives, but instead choosing some other random target I'm not aware of who has been initiated into the combat, since if they were fleeing out of fear, they wouldn't immediately about face, sometimes in clear sight of the player, to continue fighting. Melee enemies make beelines towards the player, and they'll do this based off the shortest path they can find, and they never utilize cover to close the gaps. Sometimes, though, and thankfully so, you'll find enemies like Scorch Beasts, who are the game's big boss enemy, you could say, that will fly around your head and just generally not care that you exist. And that makes what's supposed to be the dreaded final boss type enemy of the game seem benign. And I'm not gonna lie, this is something I actually found rather fortuitous, as Scorch Beasts are really tanky and really annoying to fight. I haven't killed one yet, as they're always far above my level, or they seemingly just find me at random while I'm wandering around Appalachia, or at least that's what it feels like, and then they see me, and then they kill me. They fly up in the air and they launch these weird sonic gamma radiation hula hoops at you that they almost always stun you in place. They can hit you from a mile away, and sometimes, as if that wasn't bad enough, they'll spawn scorched death claws in your face just in case you felt like enjoying yourself in this game. Speaking of Scorch Beasts, if you get the feeling from watching this that Bethesda just asset flipped the dragons from Skyrim and used the new model for it, references to dragons from Skyrim and the content check system from Fallout 4 are copied directly into Fallout 76. So that's fun. Bethesda sounds like a company that really cares about the quality of their products. Anyway, some enemies fly, some enemies shoot, and the rest of enemies generally constitute beasts and wildlife who are mostly melee-based as well, and they just charge towards the player and they attack. And this makes complete sense, sure, as they're not intelligent, but they're vicious. It would have been nice to see some variety in the ways that enemies behave without changes simply being little things like, this enemy burrows, so it teleports around you, and that's that.
Surprise, motherfucker.
And then it just does identically everything that the other enemies do. Throwing explosive towards enemies will sometimes damage their legs and cripple them, meaning they move so slow they're effectively incapacitated. Though crippling the legs of super mutants makes them completely immobile, they're just kind of stuck in place in a strange animation pose, and depending on where an enemy's standing, crippling their legs can actually make them clip into the map and be stuck there. Amateur stuff. Another big issue that I noticed while playing Fallout 76 is the hit detection. Enemies can be completely still and their hitboxes simply will not accept the shots that are placed directly into their noggins. And poor hit detections, it just adds another layer to the shoddy gameplay when the frame rate's often already really low and enemies move in very weird and unusual ways, like random speed-ups and jerky and unnatural lunges, and how they change directions without any sense of momentum like Overwatch. And the poor hit detection, it works both ways. It's not just the enemies. It means that combat with melee-based enemies, a lot of them, adds to the frustration, because while you're shooting enemies oftentimes, it won't register your damage, and foes attacking the player will regularly inflict damage at ranges that are far beyond their actual reach. So you have lunging ghouls and stinging scorpions and biting mole rats. Pretty much every enemy that uses melee damages you at ranges that exceed what you think they could manage to pull off. And it's incredibly frustrating to take damage in this way, especially considering that Bethesda, in their infinite wisdom, decided that a wide variety of enemy melee attacks will stun you. And you can't reload or fire back or move. Like, it interrupts whatever you're doing. So that's fun. In the top 5 things that I love to see in video games, being stunned by enemies and incapacitated and not having control over my character, easily in the top 5. Love to see it. Thrilling. Especially when you only have 5-6 rounds in your guns that you use most of the time, and your reload gets interrupted and you have to start all over again. I love it. It's stellar. Give me more. Let's do more of this, Bethesda. It's like we have dozens and dozens of amazing first-person shooters, and Bethesda's like, nah, let's not do any of that. Oh, and it's even more fun when you notice that one enemy can run up to smack you, and they stun you with that smack, and then they can hit you a second time before you have time to regain control. They can hit you and stun you, and while you're stunned, they can hit you again, because fuck you. In addition, animations syncing up with the effects they have on the player are also really inconsistent. In this encounter that I had recently, I was fighting a bunch of blood bugs, and they have an attack where they spit blood at the player. And here is the first frame that I take damage, though there's clearly nothing that's happening between us right now. This is pretty shoddy work for a company that has the budget and the manpower that Bethesda has. Taking damage before there's any visual cue of what's happening means that you can't have any potential to dodge the attacks other than through sheer luck. Honestly, I just wish people had higher standards. Jeez. Another really odd thing that I've been noticing is that enemies will suffer... This is gonna sound really weird, but bear with me. Enemies will suffer mass instantaneous cardiac arrest, which is my only in-game explanation for this strange phenomenon. What the fuck was that? Did all the ghouls just fucking die? I don't know, man. Yellow door, that's a bold statement. Alright, they gotta be around here somewhere. I heard them die. I heard them all just... Yep. Yep. They are dead. They have all perished mysteriously. That's odd. Sometimes, like twice in one night of playing the game, and in consecutive locations, one after the other, enemies in the area that I see moving or who suspect my presence so I know they're there and I can hear them, they'll simply all just die. And all of their death sounds will play at once, and they will not be lootable and the area can be explored freely. And it's a fascinating incompetence of game design, as sometimes you witness enemies spawning inside of you right before your eyes, and before you can walk up to engage them, they've all just perished. Their bodies are on the floor, the area is totally pacified. They just die. I have no idea. And not that enemies spawning in front of the player is particularly rare. I mean, oftentimes when they do, they're stuck T-posing until you get too close, even though there's no reason the game shouldn't have them moving around like normally when you're just... I mean, you're just so close to them. I mean, the game knows that enemies should be spawned in this location players are near, but at the same time, the game doesn't figure, because of how vision works, maybe they shouldn't be T-posing. Sometimes they won't T-pose, they'll just be frozen until you get closer, and other times they won't move at all until you actually fire upon them, despite them being right beside you. I don't know. I just report the news. I don't make it. And the problem with enemy and player spawns, I know, I just keep going on and on, but there's a lot to talk about. This game, this game's fucking shit. The problem with enemy and player spawns, like when a player loads into the game in Fallout 76, this is an issue as well. It is not unusual to spawn into an area next to enemies, and as I've discussed from earlier on, the deadliness of foes in a location can vary wildly. So fast traveling to a location is a roll of the proverbial dice, since Bethesda thinks it's just a great idea to put a player spawn location right next to where the enemies spawn. In this clip here, I spawn into the game from the main menu, and I start taking random damage, which is not actually that uncommon, honestly. And I'm dead in moments, since the game isn't intelligent enough to spawn the enemies into the game before the player, so that you can do things like see them, you know. So in this one, I load into the game, and I'm placed into a location where an enemy has already spawned, and it notices me and attacks me, which leads me into another fun fact about the game, which is how far exactly enemies will chase you. This Mirelurk thing here chased me for an incredibly long distance and into other locations and past other enemies, like through a bog, over obstacles, beneath a monorail, across a river, and into the center of the city location. Here is the body of where I eventually killed it. And I'm lucky it was still there, because it's not uncommon for bodies to disappear before you can walk over and loot them after you've killed them. So, for a little palate cleanser before I continue, I'll play some clips of random stuff that happened to me in one short gaming session for Fallout 76. These aren't even all I found that was ridiculous or broken. I just want to show you how densely compacted the silliness of this game is, and how quickly you can gather this stuff.
Shotguns are really annoying in Fortnite.
In this game, they're fucking awful. They have insane, inconsistent damage. You have to reload them a shit ton.
I know, right?
They are a joke in this game. I haven't carried a shotgun in like the last 10 levels. I probably should, just so that I can expend the ammunition.
It's a really good sneak weapon. That's it.
Wonderful. One more thing to clean up.
You can get, if you get lucky with your rolls, will have like a legendary one that fires 2 shots.
Yes, I didn't know you were watching Children of the Corn.
You see strobescent faggot. Look at this. Look at all these fucking robots.
You need to like find a clip online.
You see, what a joke of a video game. I need you to, Strobe, I need you to understand how fucking terrible this video game is. I need you to look at this with me, and I need you to witness this, and I need you to understand that this is an awful video game.
You don't need
You are
to tell
one
me.
level ahead of me. You are one level ahead of me. I'm playing this game for a meme review. I don't know why you are a level above me. I want you to look at this. Fuck it. Fuck it. The robots are dying. Fuck it. Fuck it. Kill them all, I say.
No. You need to make like, find the clip online.
They may take our lives, but they'll never take our. I killed like 12 in one shot.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. Strobe, I don't want to hit you. I don't want to hit you. I may by accident. I may by accident. You'll be fine. It'll be fine. Oh
You have
god.
fun with
As long as I stay behind the sentry bot, we should be good. We should be good.
Semper Fi, I'll salute you.
That's what I'm here for. That's oh fuck. Fuck. Finish the job for me.
I was gonna tell you, you didn't have to tell me this game sucks. All night I've been getting disconnected over and over and over and over.
Can you feel the means tonight?
Sunshine.
No.
Can I hit me on the bush? They can't hit me on the bush. This is amazing. Oh, they can crawl to the back of the bush. I can't hit me on this car.
How are you still playing that fucking game?
You think that you've done enough for me?
Lost it.
Die!
He's fucking lost it.
This fucking game!
Got AIDS in the
This
brain.
fucking game, man.
Hey, I reject
That
that.
just started a huge chain reaction of, because I went onto a thing and they couldn't get me on the thing, and so I blew up all the cars, and this is my life now.
Because of Fallout 4.
Easy.
Another thing is that for the first God knows how long, you'll find power armor all over the place, but the parts that are on it,
You can't use it until you take off the parts, yeah.
Yeah, you have to take off all the parts because the armor parts are too high. No, that's cool. His health just fucking regenerated.
There's actually level 10 power armor.
Oh, this dog is stuck without. It's not doing animations. It's just.
Wait, what if the dog T-pose? Now you know.
I'm gonna put this in my video because it's so fucking retarded. Dead enemies here. All right, I didn't fucking touch them.
Dog rights or human rights?
What's
That'll be
this?
problematic, right?
Deathclaw nest? A traveling merchant? That is not a traveling merchant. That's a Deathclaw. This Deathclaw body literally says it's a traveling merchant. I'm not fucking with you.
Take a picture. I genuinely don't believe that. Is it a piece of gore that you're looking at?
No, like, here.
Maybe it's a reference and you did. Okay.
Here
Did the
it's in
Deathclaw run
general.
at you?
No, I didn't even fuck with this Deathclaw. This is another.
Okay,
this
never
is
mind
a body of another Deathclaw that I found.
He was just the traveling merchant.
This
selling
for the
his goods.
friendly neighborhood traveling merchant Deathclaw, and I'm like, to make sure that I'm not on a gore piece, like I'm going around his body, and I'm doing everything. By the way, I don't know what he's carrying because the server's just fucking not telling me. So.
That game's not broken, dude.
So
I don't know
this
what
is-
you're talking about.
This is the traveling Deathclaw merchant.
Actually, to be fair,
Little plant
Like,
thingy
is Zach
broke
here? Yep, he's up in his room playing games. All right.
I don't even think it's worth curing most of the diseases.
What the fuck?
Other than shell shock.
So I never really got to do my kind of.
Yeah, I know. It says my childhood was a lot different than kids.
Never since the Eviscerator nerf, Berserker actually requires skilled
What the hell is... What the fuck is... Oh, shit. Enemies just...
Oh, they nerfed the Eviscerator?
What
Yeah,
the fuck
it
is
doesn't-
that? A scorched Deathclaw?
Yeah.
You know what my favorite weapon was in New Vegas?
What?
The Master Sword.
My favorite song from New Vegas was Country Road.
You're a monster.
I got it. I killed it. Yep. I exploited the retarded AI and I killed a scorched Deathclaw that was like 20
drop
levels
springs?
above me. I
Why
didn't
would
get
a Deathclaw
anything.
have
Pocketed,
springs?
welded,
That's the
raider chest
point.
piece. Anyway, back to the video where I was talking about the insane distances an enemy will chase you. The problem's compounded further when fighting against enemies because sometimes your foes will become invincible and they'll just not take damage. Here's an example with a scorched boss. The enemy takes consecutive multiple shots from the rifle, however his health bar just doesn't feel like budging today. And here's one where pouring hundreds of minigun rounds into a Mirelurk Queen does nothing. Not even a scratch. And that's not the only issue regarding enemy health. On a fair number of occasions, I've watched enemies that I've damaged simply regenerate their health. I have no idea why. They don't take items and use them. They just get all their health back. It's a freebie from Jesus. Everyone gets one. It's like the game's taunting you, mocking you, laughing at your foolishness. And glitching relating to combat, it doesn't stop there. Oftentimes, when you throw grenades, they just won't explode. Which is always a pleasant surprise in the middle of combat when you're really relying on that grenade to blow up. And sometimes when you throw grenades, they just clip to the ground and then they fall into oblivion. And then you can hear them explode far, far away and out of sight. One time I had an issue involving a fragmentation mine where I set it down where I knew enemies would be on the other side of a door, and for some reason it exploded next to me. So, you know, that's fun. I have lots and lots of clips and bits of how clumsy and strange and glitchy and buggy the combat is, how the enemies look, how they behave, their textures, their animations. The entire game reeks of an amateur project. Fallout 76 is primarily a first-person shooter, and it is arguably the worst component of the game. It is the worst first-person shooter I've ever played. Almost every element of this game is frustrating, inconsistent, or dated. This game is like a live streamer's dream. It's a meme production. But let's move on because there's still more to Fallout 76 that we have not yet touched on. VATS is an acronym for Vault-Tec Assisted Targeting System. In the modern Fallout games, it drew its inspiration from the turn-based nature of the original Fallout games. Whereas in Fallout 3, New Vegas, and Fallout 4, using VATS would stop or slow down time significantly, and it would allow you to target specific body parts. Out of the proverbial box, VATS in Fallout 76 does not allow you to target specific body parts. The player has to unlock the perception-based concentrated fire perk that will allow you this option. This used to be a function of VATS that was available from the beginning of the game in the other recent modern Fallout games. And I found myself not using VATS outside of a few scenarios, mainly enemies that were at odd angles as they moved, like looking down at them from cars or other terrain I was exploiting to be safe from them, or from oddly shaped enemies that were agile, like mosquito thingies. Typically, since most enemies in Fallout 76 just kind of stand there so you could shoot them in the face, it wasn't really needed. When activating VATS, there's a noticeable delay until your accuracy shown on enemies, with the percentage there, it begins to normalize. And I'm not sure if this is a bug or if it's done by design. In this game, it could be either. I don't fucking know. However, while you aim at targets in VATS and fire upon them, your weapon's model doesn't really point itself towards the enemies you're firing upon. This doesn't affect the functional aspect of VATS, but it looks really awkward and lazy. So in fairness, I guess it matches the rest of the game. Heyo. Anyway, by using VATS, your Jesus Christ. Oh, I'm going insane. What was I saying? By using VATS, your character builds up a critical shot meter down there at the bottom after you land hits, and you can activate this with a spacebar that will give your next shot a critical damage increase. So that's nifty. VATS isn't useless by any means. It's possible to spec a character around the use of VATS, with perception and I believe it's agility bonuses that affect your action points and other buffs to the feature to make it far more viable than its out-of-the-box functionality. Personally, I didn't use it much, mostly because I forgot it even existed as a mechanic in this game to utilize it all. But all in all, if you don't particularly care about VATS or the idea of VATS, you rarely ever will feel the urge to even use it. If anything, it would pop up as this backup option when the frame rate tanks or when ghouls and critters show horrible animations that are difficult to aim over. VATS as a real-time aiming system, it's fine. It could definitely be improved upon, but it does serve a purpose that is a viable one for combat. The leveling up process in Fallout 76 isn't anything unusual or strange if played previous Fallout games in the past, or really most MMOs. You level up by primarily killing enemies and completing quests, though you do get small bits of experience for crafting items and discovering new locations and other things. As you do gain XP, you'll level up, and your character will become more and more powerful. For the most part, due to upgrades that you choose through the perk system and by increasing your special statistic. Every time you level up in Fallout 76, you get to increase one of your special attributes by a single point, and they all start at 0. As you increase each special statistic, you open up new perks relating to each of their respective attributes. Special stands for Strength, Perception, Endurance, Charisma, Intelligence, Agility, and Luck. Strength helps you do things like inflict more melee damage, carry more weight, reduce the weight of certain kinds of items like armor and chems, do more shotgun damage or heavy gun damage, or take less melee damage. Perception helps you do things like make VATS more viable, find items in the world, pick locks, increase the damage of certain rifles, ignore enemy armor, gain night vision, and gather more materials from plants and animals. Endurance? It It lets you take less radiation damage. It makes your food and drink more potent, resists disease, increases your chem duration effects. It lets you breathe underwater or regenerate health from radiation or by standing in the sunlight. Charisma, since there's no dialogue with NPCs in Fallout 76, now affects the groups you are in with other players. It can affect effects that happen when you're in your camp, and other various things like gaining more experience in general, gaining resistances for being alone or for being with a group. It gives you better buying and selling prices, regenerating health for revived players or curing their radiation. It lets you run faster when you're in a team or nerfs enemies after you strike them with damage. Intelligence does things like make your healing items more efficient. It allows you to hack computer terminals, do more explosive damage, scrap items for better components, repair and maintain items better, and craft more numerous and higher quality items. Agility helps you regenerate action points faster, which allows you to use VATS, sprint, jump. It reduces the weight of food and pistols. You consume less action points while sprinting, and it makes your sneaking more efficient and increases sneak damage bonuses you get. And lastly, there's luck. It helps you research containers a second time for more ammo or food or money. It makes your food items spoil slower. It causes your weapon to repair itself when it's struck at times. It'll help you cripple enemy limbs, instantly reload after exhausting your magazine, and even deflect back incoming damage. And this is all a very abbreviated list of the kinds of perks you can choose for each attribute. The full list is expansive, and there's a wide variety of effects that your character can improve themselves with. Most perks in the game have tiers of effectiveness, their own levels in a way. Picking a perk more than once will increase its effectiveness. So if I choose the Demolition Expert perk, which increases my explosive damage by 20%, I could select that perk again up to 5 times to increase my explosive damage by a potential 100%, doubling the damage of them. I could then use the Perception-based Grenadier perk, which increases explosive radius by 50% and then 100%. And you can see pretty obviously how perks can complement each other very, very well. It's actually rather impressive, as I was reading through all the potential options for this list that I just named off, and I can see why respecking a character would be desirable, or making new characters with different builds and playstyles would appeal to people. I mean, it does to me. And there's even a really nifty character build planner for Fallout 76 I found at nukesdragons.com that lets you essentially build up a character and see the stats along the way. So that's useful. That's really nifty. Because you can get pretty deep with it. Honestly though, the perk system, it honestly impresses me. I really do like the variety of bonuses and the interesting effects you can give your character. And I think that having your special stats increase from all starting at 0, instead of assigning them at the beginning of your character's creation, is an interesting and potentially better way of leveling up. It's not imperfect though. I would say there's plenty of very borderline useless perks that nobody will ever choose or that you'll quickly gravitate away from. Some just don't hold a candle to others in the same category. Big shift here, for the most part, comes with it's got positives and negatives. You sort of build up a character as you go, trying to beef up things that will help you, while other less pressing concerns you just sort of learn to deal with. You don't start out with I want to be this kind of character, quite as much as you did in other Fallout games. Your character grows based off what you'll find more necessary to improve upon, and in that sense, it feels more natural a kind of progression, more open-ended. However, this also means there's less commitment to what you're doing, less focus on a role, less need to specialize as you play the game or stick to something you decided upon. Perks can be changed at any time, which is an odd decision to me. It feels unusual. An example of this would be to have lock-picking perks unlocked, but not having them equipped until you actually want to pick a lock. Because when you're not picking a lock, the lockpick perk is just taking up space. So most of the time you have your concentrated fire perk equipped that you already have, but you swap to pick lock when you want to find a secured container that has a level 1 lock. This makes the choice to want to hack into terminals and pick locks that you find not quite the same, not quite as weighty. it doesn't have the this at the expense of that idea, since you can essentially toggle it on and off when it is and isn't needed. The lack of permanence and commitment to your character extends past just the perks, and even into the aesthetic side. In Fallout 76, just like in real life, you can change your gender whenever you feel like it. This doesn't impact the gameplay in a meaningful way, it just adds to the feeling that I'm not playing a character I should really in any way feel attached to or concerned with. And I'm perfectly fine with the idea that Fallout 76 has for leveling up characters, and the perks are often genuinely useful and interesting, even with all of the dull filler ones in between. The problem here is that these potentially excellent changes, and I mean that, these are potentially excellent changes to the Fallout formula that are overshadowed by buggy, glitchy, clunky, awful gameplay, and the perk system clashes with that in a number of ways that hurt both of them. So, for instance, as alluded to earlier in this review, the game for me hit a really noticeable difficulty shift at around level 25 to 27, at least for me. So that meant for the first 25 levels, which constitutes about half of your perk selection, because you only get 50, I had almost entirely a selection of perks that were just quality of life improvements or time savers. Since I melted anything on my screen for the most part, I never invested into damage buffs or armor penetration or any resistances. Instead, I stocked up on perks that would keep food from spoiling faster, that tripled the effectiveness of dog food, which is totally OP by the way, perks that would reduce my radiation intake or allow me to carry more stuff or reduce the weight of certain types of items, which is a big deal, as I'll discuss soon. But this meant that I had to essentially play catch up with my next 23 levels. I'm currently level 48, so I'll only have slots for 2 more perks, and every level after that, after 25 or so, I did what I could to increase the damage of rifles, explosives to boost my armor penetration, stumble percentages. I did everything I could to pick perks that related to damage and surviving combat. And that was a fairly dark time in this game for me, where I just kept getting thrashed by enemies that I simply could not take on reasonably. I hit a point where I really kind of wanted to explore, but the points that I needed to go out to explore were often full of those enemies that they just shat down my neck. This aspect of the combat and how it relates to perks really showed in Fallout 76 especially, that weapons you find in the world that you are not perked for will be pretty garbage, but weapons that you can be perked for will be really useful, way more useful, or you'll just find that enemy that doesn't give a shit about damage you put out its way. Plasma weapons, laser weapons, automatic weapons, melee weapons, I'm not perked for any of these kinds of items, so their effectiveness is severely handicapped for me if I pick them up and I use them. This gives them a throwaway attitude as you stockpile the ammo for these weapons, since you never really use them because they don't have a lot of effectiveness, and they become dump weapons you use almost like free shots that don't consume the ammunition that you actually do care about. Not that running out of ammunition in the game is really an issue, depending on how you play, but the threat of running dry on bullets is oftentimes a more fearsome notion than the reality of it. And those of us with a more conservative mind for ammunition, we might fall into this little mental trap. This isn't a good thing. It's not a bad thing, really. It's the nature of specialization, though in Fallout 76 you can certainly boost all of them, so calling it specializing is admittedly an odd way to phrase it. There's nothing to stop you from having an equally potent melee and ranged built character. But one aspect of perks and leveling that's also worth mentioning are the perk card packs. Every 5 levels you get a random assortment of perks that you can use, and that's about that. It's an added bit of randomization on top of the system that's already in place, and I don't really feel like it's worthy of more than that in mentioning. I wish it was less random and more guidable and directable, but since it feels more like just an additional layer on top of an already decent system, it's among the least of my worries with Fallout 76. Items, crafting, and item management, your inventory, it's almost identical to Fallout 4, and it comprises a pretty large but really familiar aspect of your game time. But there's one significant change about Fallout 76 that you'll probably notice really soon. Weapons have requirement levels. You can't just pick up a gun and be shitty with it. You have to be the correct level for it. And if you find a weapon that's above your level, you just can't flat out use it. It'll sit in your inventory or your stash until you're appropriately leveled. And I hate this. If it was implemented better as a system, I probably wouldn't mind as much, but there's just a load of games that have item levels but feel way more fair and balanced than this game does. When the game released, it wasn't unusual, and in fact, it was actually fairly common for me to kill boss enemies, really tough enemies, and have them drop items that were, and I'm being serious here, that were 35 levels above my character. So that was demoralizing, tons of fun. And this happened constantly, though the problem is much less severe now. Enemies will still drop items that you can't use yet, but the range at which they're dropped is now much more close to your character's actual level. So the issue's still there, just to a significantly lesser degree. And there also isn't an option to upgrade the levels of the weapons and armor that you use. If you have a level 35 pipe revolver, and you want a level 40 pipe revolver, you have to find a new pipe revolver that's level 40, or you have to craft one for yourself. And then you have to upgrade all of the individual components to match what you had before. The barrel, the brake, the receiver, the sights, the grip, the magazine, all that. Some items have even more. But to me, this feels like an unnecessary resource sink for both weapons and armor. And I mean that I can't reliably keep upgrading a weapon that I like. I have to constantly be hunting around for things that I do like, replacements for my old stuff, not stuff to keep what I like maintained and in my hands. Acquiring upgrades for weapons and armor is now unlocked by scrapping weapons of the same type. And by same type, I mean that exact weapon. So this is a change from Fallout 76 that I really don't like either. Scrapping a hunting rifle, for instance, will give you a very small chance to unlock certain mods for the hunting rifle. And this can make getting mods for weapons really slow, because the carry limit that you have isn't very high, and you can only carry so much to bring back to a workbench to scrap. And if it wasn't slow enough for weapons, for armor it's much, much slower. Remember how in Fallout 4 there were a bunch of raiders everywhere, and raiders would wear armor, chest and arm and leg and head pieces, and they could be raider or leather or metal and stuff like that, and so you kind of had a pretty reliable source of different armor types that you could scrap and unlock and find for yourself to wear. Well, the Scorched, who essentially act as raider replacements in this game, they don't wear armor like that. So your ability to learn mods for your armor is even slower than it is with weapons. And enemies can still drop armor as loot, but you won't get your hands on it at nearly the rate you did in the previous game. And unlike the previous game, Fallout 4, when you remove a mod from a weapon, it doesn't go into your inventory like an item that you can install on another weapon. When you remove a mod from a gun or from armor, it is gone. It's solid gone. And I recall a time when I was in town, Beckley. I want to say Beckley, I think is where it was. I found a pump-action shotgun with a suppressor. Ooh la la, that's the kind of awesome shit that I was looking for. And I remember this so much because it was the first suppressor that I had found for shotguns. And I like shotguns. But the game doesn't allow you to take the suppressor off of a weapon that you find and put it on the identically constructed weapon that you're currently using. Because that would be silly, and that's just not how things work in a Fallout world. You would have to, basically, take the new shotgun that had the suppressor and upgrade the entire new shotgun to match the quality upgrades of the shotgun you have currently. You're essentially building a weapon around an attachment instead of just taking off the suppressor and moving it to another one. So that's frustrating. Can't say I'm a fan. Oh, and items like Fallout 4, they have legendary properties. Some, at least. So they'll do things like turn you invisible if you're standing still and crouched, or they'll give you a damage bonus to certain types of enemies like insects or animals or whatever. They'll give you special resistances or maybe health regeneration, other effects. And these items can't be scrapped. So unless they're useful to you at the time, there's really no point in holding on to them. Some bonuses are really neat, actually. But some of them, they're passive, and they're not very helpful, and they don't come into play often, so they're not really even worth mentioning. And since item levels can't be upgraded, that means if you find a legendary weapon that you like a lot, then eventually you'll just outgrow it. You can't upgrade it over time, and you can't put resources into it to make it stronger and stronger to keep pace with you. You'll just... Well, it'll eventually grow objectively weaker as you encounter more and more difficult enemies. And then, it will just be time to throw it away or sell it. Fallout 76, it teaches you not to get attached to what you find. And I feel like in a scenario like Fallout 76 is trying to present to us, the idea that we can't have our trusty favorite weapon or our lucky sidearm, well, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it fits the world well. Fallout adds a throwaway attitude to the weapons and armor you have instead of a find a thing you love and take good care of it sort of mentality. Bobbleheads and magazines, they're found in much higher quantities than before now, and they only confer temporary bonuses to players. The length of these bonuses can be increased through perks, but I found myself just selling them for caps instead of consuming them. They certainly don't have the rare and valuable item appeal that they had in the past. I remember in Fallout 3, when I still played on Xbox, I would find out where all the bobbleheads were, and I would try to go to each and every one because I wanted to make my character really strong. Well, those days are gone. Those were the days. Anyway, item management in the game is, I think it's one of Fallout 76's greatest failures. Whereas in other modern Fallout games, your lair, your house, hidey hole, it had containers that you could fill with items essentially without limit. And your character now only has a stash that can be accessed from the base you make, the camp you make, or at certain points in the map like train stations, and they're always there. And so at the release of the game, the stash had an abysmally low limit of 400 units, which is what's about double a low-level character's carry weight. And this insultingly low amount was eventually increased to 600, which is still something that I think you'll reach rather quickly. I know that I did. And reaching the stash limit means that your character's storage is full. And any items that you cannot carry on your person, they won't have a place to go. There's nowhere to put it. And many players, like myself, like to collect in Fallout games and Elder Scrolls games, and if they find a rare or a legendary weapon, they'll keep it. They'll bring it to their house to have at a later time. They'll put it on the wall or keep it under the mattress. I collect scrap and junk and building materials and a stash of medical items and other aid materials that I can put to use later. And between weapons and armor, mods, junk, aid items, ammo, and all the other stuff, the stash fills up quickly. That 600 limit, yeah, you get to it fast. And I found myself constantly bringing back to the stash far, far, far more than it could ever hold. In a game that's essentially about looting, I kind of felt like I wasn't supposed to loot too much, since I wouldn't have a place to put all the stuff I pick up. And I really, really do not like this change. I really loathe it. I like to collect armor sets, weapons, special bits and bobs in the world, almost like trophies or memoirs of things I've done and seen or quests that I've completed. But if you have the collector mindset in Fallout 76, like you might have had in other Elder Scrolls games or in previous Fallout games, I think you'll find a frustrating roadblock here. I think the idea of such a low stash weight in this game relates back to the always online nature of Fallout 76. If players can't keep in their inventories a constantly growing stockpile of acquired goods and materials, they'll have to spend more time with their hours of Fallout looking for things on the fly, or simply when they're needed at a given time for a specific thing. And this, I think, was Bethesda's way of keeping players constantly working on the grind or the gameplay loop to keep an always online world running. It needs to be a steady and never-ending cycle, which slows down if you aren't restricted with the resources you can put in storage. So, for instance, I found myself, when I played the game, I would have a gun, and it would need to be repaired, and so I would change the items that I would tag the items specifically for that weapon instead of going to all the stuff that I had picked up previously just for this occasion and use that stuff because I worried about collecting too much to fill up my stash. It was very much a, what do I need to do now, or what do I need to do in the very near future, and shift my focus to that, not just start collecting everything that you feel will be sort of useful. And I wish, instead, they put, like, limits on how much of each type of material you could save, copper, aluminum, steel, all that stuff, but would allow us to store weapons and items as we wished. Fallout 76 clearly aims for a more keep-going process, where you are constantly replacing what you have with new things and progressively shifting the items that you use, not having that trusty sidearm or outfits that you feel fit you and that you really like. Returning to the stash, it often felt like a drag. It really was just a depressing break on the experience. I was constantly selling my stuff to the vendors. Oh, and they only have a 200 cap limit, which you reach just like that. And then I'd be fiddling around with the items that I did have, moving stuff from my stash to my inventory and dropping big stacks of stuff on the floor in these gigantic quantities, like earlier in the video where I came across the drop materials of other players, where you just have stuff in the tens of thousands, sometimes over 100,000 worth of an item. The world is filled with things to collect and scrap and find, but it's honestly, it's a waste to be thorough about it. I don't like leaving useful things just laying around. But I had to start learning that my time spent looting in a Fallout game would now just sort of be wasted. And that's really weird for a Fallout game. One change, because it's not all bad. One change I do like about the game is that some items, like Rainyway, which removes radiation, and Rad-X, which helps resist radiation, can have diluted variants that are less potent but more common. Stim packs, which are the game's primary healing item, they can be either diluted, regular, or even super. And I do like this change. It's a good way to vary the balance of availability and potency in items that the player would find useful. All of the item management, though, it'll pretty much be done through the Pip-Boy, a very, very familiar interface, pretty much exactly like it was before. And it can now be toggled from its regular view into a more screen-filling but out-of-character display of your inventory. Here you can check your status, your health effects, quests, you can listen to the radio, which won't happen in this review because YouTube and copyright strikes are the worst thing since fucking Hitler, and mostly you'll just be using the inventory, the Pip-Boy, to manage your items anyway. You'll equip weapons and armor here, and you'll cycle through your items for aid and whatnot. And the game does include a useful weapon wheel that can have guns and grenades and aid items, etc. assigned to it for quicker designation. And that'll be important because remember, this is an online-only game, so there's no pausing. So if something isn't in your weapon wheel and you need it, well, I hope you can cycle through your inventory quickly. And as no doubt you've probably seen, power armor exists in this game as well. It functions practically identically to its Fallout 4 inception, in the way it looks and moves and basically everything. They copied and pasted it, like a lot of things in Fallout 76. Each suit of armor is comprised of a frame that requires a fusion core for power, and this fusion core is drained of its energy as the user utilizes the power armor. Frames can have a body for armor, left and right leg, left and right arm, and a helmet. And each of these pieces has a level attached to it that has to be met by the player. So the first 4 or so sets of power armor in the game that I found, I wasn't allowed to enter into it until I removed the armor from the frame. So I could only have the option to walk around in a bare, naked power armor frame, like a poor person. And lots of players that you meet will be wearing power armor as well. And I think it's meant to be one of those endgame sorts of things you aspire for and build up. This is my suit of power armor, But seeing so many players in power armor, it really, I guess you could say it cheapens the idea. It's not rare or interesting. It's not valuable. It's not something special. Everybody has one, and they're laying around all over the place. And where once power armor was something amazing and rare to be sought over, now it's something that I just find laying around wherever I go. I'll go to a farm, And in the storage shed of a farm, there'll just be power armor. You know, in case you just really need to plow hard. You cannot craft while in power armor, though you can scrap items. If you want to craft or repair your equipment at a workbench, you have to exit the power armor in order to do so. And when I began this section of the review talking about power armor, I didn't carry any around, I didn't have any in my inventory. I had to go and get some. And luckily, getting power armor is really easy. I just looked up some locations and strolled on over, and they really are just kind of all over the place. Some locations have multiple sets. You just go from point to point and get the armor pieces of unattended frames, and voila! You are now wearing a full set of power armor. Also important to note that a power armor frame or chassis can be carried in the inventory for only 10 units of weight, which is significantly less than many rifles in the game, even if the chassis, the frame, has any armor on it or not. While armor parts, of which there are 6, do not actually weigh anything when they're added to the chassis. So by putting power armor on the chassis, you ensure it will only weigh 10 units, even though their parts in reality add up to anywhere from 68 to 88 units. So you can wear power armor while having a second set in your inventory, and that's an unusual choice, but alrighty then. But that's about all I have to say regarding some of the items and such in Fallout 76, and I feel like it's time I actually talked about one of the biggest aspects of this game that's not yet gone really explored yet. And by that, I mean Appalachia. I have heard Fallout 76 videos tell me that it is an ugly game, and I have heard others tell me that it is a gorgeous game. But I think the better way to phrase it, a more accurate way at least, is that Fallout 76 is a bit of both. It is inconsistent. There's elements of both of these things mixed in together to make an overall picture. Appalachia is at times legitimately gorgeous, and other times it is legitimately ugly. Remember before the game launched months ago, Todd Howard stood on a stage and told us,
"We always start with the world, and this time it features all new rendering, lighting, and landscape technology. It allows us to have 16 times the detail and even view distant weather systems across the map."
All new rendering, lighting, and landscape technology, it allows 16 times the detail. 16. 6 and 10. Viewing distant weather systems. Fuck, that is some mighty big talk there, Todd. And there's a part of me that even at the time wanted to believe you. But here we are. It's a new year. It's a new world. And I can't help but feel as if Fallout 76's Appalachia is simultaneously the best and the worst thing about this game. Appalachia is like, how do I even come up with an analogy for this? Alright, I think I've got one. Alright, imagine a guy has 1,000 dirty styrofoam cups, and he stacks up all the cups and makes one big, massive pyramid with these cups, making them taller and taller and taller. And he steps away and displays his creation to you. And upon first seeing it, your eyes widen. It's a very impressive display, the fact that somebody did this. It stands out. It catches your eye. But then, after a moment, the surprise wanes and wears off. And the more you look closer, the more you notice that it's just a bunch of cheap styrofoam cups stacked on top of each other. And they're not even clean. They're dirty. They're kind of discolored. And some of them are even a little bent out of shape in some places. In fact, you kind of wonder how the whole thing manages not to collapse. That's Appalachia. Let's take a screenshot. Click. I don't have a sound effect. Wow, look at that. That looks kind of nice. Huh, neat. The lighting, the bridges, the water below, the trees, and the vegetation. Wait a second. Look at the rock cliff here on the top left. And, oh, the textures on the bridge supports there. The water itself. These weird shadow line thingies. Oh god, look at that tree. Dear lord, and what's even going on over here? You know, the more you actually look at Fallout 76, the worse it gets. Oftentimes, a location is busy with details. There are trash heaps and props and lighting effects and vegetation, buildings, rubble. There's a lot going on. And it kind of tricks you into thinking the game is prettier than it actually is. So there's plenty of screenshots you can take and places you can go that are immersive to a degree, and how all the ambience and such come together to make an environment. But once you stop and actually look at the rock face or the propeller or the damn bushes, it falls apart. I think what saves Fallout 76 from some of my ire is that it is indeed the more diverse and interesting world in modern Fallout games yet. The more diverse, the most diverse yet. Fuck it, it's staying in. Probably more than the Elder Scrolls, I'd say, honestly. But the fact I have to stop and think to myself, is this late 2018 game actually better looking than a 2015 game? Or a 2011 game? That should say something. And yes, Fallout 76 does look better than Skyrim, mostly. It does sort of look better than Fallout 4, but the improvements, especially to the latter, are minimal. And honestly, since Fallout 4 and Skyrim both have a plethora of graphics mods to change the way the game looks, I would actually say that they both look better than Fallout 76 if you take that in mind. Fallout 76 is doing a huge disservice to itself in that regard, and instead of taking the mods that made the previous game so gorgeous and interesting and stunning to look at, Fallout 76 just gives us a world that only marginally improves over Fallout 4. And that's kind of one of the big issues. Appalachia is only a tiny step up from Fallout 4's Commonwealth, despite the insane reuse of assets. The locations themselves can be interesting, and if more time and care was put into making them look better and the objects, buildings, props fit together better, it would have served the game all the more. But unfortunately, the overall appeal of a location is often overshadowed by the fact that so many of the details themselves are poorly made. Appalachia feels like it was the only part of this game that had any work put into it, in much the same way that stacking up 1,000 dirty styrofoam cups is work and effort, but ultimately something that you can't stop noticing. The zones of Appalachia are the forest, a much better game, which is the starting area with verdant, lush autumn vegetation, kind of like an actual forest, odd for the apocalypse, I would say. The Toxic Valley, a caustic white and brown, barren alien landscape. You have the Ash Heap, a mountainous and rocky desert with red-hot crevasses and mining operations. You have the Savage Divide, a tall and narrow stretch of harsh wilderness and badlands that cuts the map kind of in two pieces. You've got the Mire, a swampy, wet, highly vegetated marsh, and Cranberry Bog, which is orange. To the game's credit, the zones of the map really do vary in their aesthetic, and it's normally very easily recognizable what zone somebody's in just at a glance. There's a clear and obvious difference in the terrain and the look of an area, something that Appalachia does well and that I legitimately appreciate. It has an MMO kind of feel, where zones look differently and have a different range of enemies. When it comes to the weather effects of Fallout 76, Appalachia is disappointing. Rain looks sparse and is barely a sprinkle on the screen, not a torrent of a downpour that maybe hinders your visibility and hides you from being heard by nearby enemies. Fallout 76 does boast radiation storms as weather. It makes the air into a green fog that looks legitimately interesting, especially in comparison to the otherwise uninspired weather effects. Rad storms give your character radiation intermittently if you're not protected, and they reduce visibility. However, as cool as I found the Radstorm to be, I only found a single one in my 66 hours of playing this game. Only once. A single time, I took a picture here. Isn't it lovely? Don't blink or you will miss it. As for viewing distant weather systems, yes, you can see rain in the distance. And that's neat, I guess. That's kind of like, yeah, over there it's raining, which is kind of cool, I suppose. kind of expected more, but baby steps with Bethesda, I suppose. And what should happen if you're tootly-doodling along Appalachia and you cross the barrier underneath a rain cloud? Well, it only takes half a second for clear blue, sunny skies to turn into gray, dreary precipitation. Just like that. But the weather changes aren't the only things that lack subtlety in this game. I couldn't tell you how many times I was brought out of the world by the sudden changes in the day and night cycle when things got way too bright, way too quickly. To the point where I would be looking over my shoulder, wondering if a character had just turned on a flashlight my way. That's what Fallout 76 does to a person. It makes you think the sun rising is something you have to peer cautiously over your shoulder for. The interiors of Fallout 76, though, I feel are the biggest improvement in terms of the game's aesthetic and immersion. The environments of a video game aren't just about the vistas and the landscapes of the outside world, but also the more closer and intimate, haunting interiors of abandoned or broken down buildings that are hazy with dust in the air, the rubble of collapsed passageways, and the scattered remnants of furniture and other interior mainstays. It was in these interiors where sneaking about, avoiding detection, and trying to get the drop on enemies I had the most enjoyment with in Fallout 76, which is exactly how I felt about Fallout 4. To immerse myself in the world presented to me, I sneakily crouched and scuttled about a newfound factory, a garage, or a complex, trying to do my best to avoid damage and use my guile to kill as many enemies as possible, using a much more believable tactic than just taking damage. At times like these, I was able to, in my own way, skirt around the bullet-spongy enemies, the clunky combat, the cumbersome inventory, the inconsistent landscape graphics, and actually enjoy myself. I got flashbacks to the times I enjoyed in Fallout 4, and playing this title as a stealth game was rather satisfying. Otherwise, though, you'll spend your time hopping from place to place, from farms to factories, golf courses to abandoned shacks, watchtowers to gas stations to shopping malls. The different locations in Fallout 76 are impressively varied, and the world of Appalachia presents the player with a wide swath of different aesthetics and sometimes unusually structured locales that pull you into the idea that this is indeed a world just starting to regrow from the destruction of a nuclear apocalypse so long ago. A believable presentation of a sci-fi themed wasteland that mixes the remnants of the familiar Fallout retro future with the savage and untamed wilderness, where clanking man-made machinery clashes with the much younger bestial monstrosities created by the cruel scientific excesses of a humankind long gone, leaving us to tame through struggle their melancholic legacy. God, I sound like such a faggot. All new rendering, lighting, landscape technology, 16 times the detail. These are all bold claims to make, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was in some way true. You know, since we're talking about all this new technology that Bethesda apparently has at their fingertips, I want to take a moment and tell you about something I have noticed in Fallout 76 that I have never seen in a video game before. I mean, I had to come up with a name for it. Since I didn't exactly recognize the graphical phenomenon that it is, I decided to call it movement blur. Not motion blur, though I would forgive you for thinking that's what I meant. I mean movement blur. Whenever you move, not look around, but when your character is in motion, altering coordinates, legs are shifting, character moving, the world becomes blurry. Everything on screen, the characters, the environment, the items, you, the player, everything. And when you stop moving, the world comes back into focus again before your very eyes. This doesn't happen as you look around. Again, it's not motion blur. It only happens when you actually move around the world, even if it's just an inch. And it's very distracting for me. I play with a 1440p resolution on a 27-inch screen, and this movement blur effect is really noticeable, and it's kind of irritating, and I have no idea, well, I don't know why it's in the game. And as far as I know, it's tied to anti-aliasing as the setting, and the cost for removing it is a pretty significant hit in performance. How much of that new technology went into the creation of Fallout 76's world? I can't say. What I do feel, though, is that Appalachia is perhaps my favorite aspect of Fallout 76. And for all its faults and poorly done textures and clipping issues within the environment, I still feel as if this was the only part of the game given any real considerable effort. I wonder just how much more impressed I would be if the game wasn't so held back either by rush or lack of polish or perhaps even just sheer incompetence. Also, swimming underwater looks like shit. It looks like basically no effort went into creating underwater areas. I mean, this looks awful. And while Fallout 76, at least I feel, is a lost cause, the design of Appalachia does give me hope for future Bethesda titles in terms of the worlds that they'll be able to create for the player to explore. However, with the incredible lack of polish and attention to details that Fallout 76 seems to have, I'm also worried as well. It's a mix for me. I think Bethesda has what it takes deep down, so long as they put in the effort to give us the kinds of neat places and interesting locations that Appalachia offers, though hopefully in a game that does so much better in all the ways that I feel Fallout 76 failed. I think that's why if you're a player who really puts immense value into the exploration aspects of video games, going to interesting places, seeing things, doing your best to immerse yourself in a world, value can be found in Fallout 76. But for really anybody else, it would be difficult for even a world like Appalachia to overcome all of the other negative aspects that Bethesda has created for the game. As long as Bethesda cares, then they will make beautiful, interesting worlds to explore. As long as they care. As long as they show effort and respect to the universe that so many players love, they'll do well. But in Fallout 76, I think it's clear that the passion simply did not exist. Though sometimes, if you squint your eyes and you look just right and you find the right places, I can't help but feel that at least there were a few people on the team who maybe actually did give a shit. Events and quests make up a portion of the gameplay and busy work in Fallout 76, not just casual exploration to satisfy your curiosity for the unknown, or your desire for a nicer hat than the one you're wearing now, or a better-fitting pair of trousers. Events and quests are actually almost not even worth mentioning. They're mostly dull, boring, repetitious, and most of the ones that I've done myself have been little more than dressed-up, slowly paced escort missions, or kill the waves of enemies missions. There's little of interest here, nothing exciting or noteworthy, nothing innovative. It's all stuff you've seen before in other much better games, and the way that the events are given narrative explanation seems lazy when there's apparently some voice on the radio that asks for help, but they can't actually be found anywhere, and you can't communicate back to them, ask them questions, and you know that it's all some attempt for Bethesda to avoid having to actually make models for NPCs, or create dialogue, or put decent effort into creating a believable world. It's just a voice on the radio that tells you to do something, so there's something to do. And the effects it has on the world, even for the most focused and easily convinced of players who want to invest themselves in the world, it seems non-existent and pointless. The events in particular, they don't seem like they're actual things that happen in a living, changing world. They're just jobs that pop up, and players do them for experience and some goodies. There's no real impact on Appalachia, or any of its now deceased factions. One event, Feed the People, has you using machinery in a canning factory to produce food. But everyone in Appalachia except for players is dead, and you all just kind of wonder why you should even bother. It doesn't do any good for the world around you, it's just a job to do, and it gives you XP and loot, so might as well, right? Events also repeat at different places, meaning the messenger event, where you escort a stupid fucking robot to some stupid fucking house to deliver a stupid fucking message, can take place in the middle of a swamp, or down the sloping hill of a forest, or along a lonely highway, where most of your time is just spent walking alongside it. Unless it just randomly dies, because apparently a robot that waits 25 years to deliver a stupid message can't possibly finish its mission unless it gets escorted in the next 20 minutes or else it'll die. The majority of the quests and the events that I did complete in Fallout 76 were done solo. For a game that stresses online functionality, that is multiplayer, always, all the time, the only time when I ever felt like an event was a community sort of endeavor was actually tonight. The last night, the night that I finished this review, after 66 hours of this game, was the first time I happened to come across an event where it seemed like it was actually kind of an effort, where multiple people came together to complete it. Even though this particular event can be easily completed by a single person without any issues. Because I'd done that a few times before. It's also worthy of mentioning that bugs in Fallout 76 can sometimes cause events to be impossible to complete, and if the server decides it just doesn't like your face and disconnects, then all of your progress on an event will be lost. Which happened to me once, and I lost about 50 minutes worth of progress. Here, I feel as if you should share in my frustration and misery. No! No, I spent the last 50 minutes fixing this shit for an event! No! I spent the last 50 minutes fixing this shit by myself, because I'm the only fucker on the server who's here! And then, all I have to do is hit the finish button, and on the way, I'm disconnected! What a fun video game. I love video games that have events that take a long time to complete and are clearly designed for a lot of people to do them, but since I'm the only person around in the area, I do it all by myself. And right when I'm about to finish, going towards the finish quest button, the server disconnects, and I've lost 50 minutes of my life. Thank you so much, Bethesda. And I'm not proud of getting that angry at a video game, sitting in my room barking at a computer screen, but if you haven't played this game as much as I have, then you don't know. You don't know what this game will do to a person. You're not yourself when you play Fallout 76. Fallout 76 does have a new feature for Fallout, a photo mode. The photo mode allows you to take pictures of your character, which you can pose and zoom in and do all sorts of stuff, and then those will become loading screens, so you can remind yourself of all of the wonderful, fun times that you had playing Fallout 76. When I logged into the game to get some footage of photo mode for this review, this game is a fucking meme. In any event, the last thing that I do have to say regarding the environment of Fallout 76 are the fact that you will eventually come across player-built bases and camps while you're wandering around the world. Now, in Fallout 4, I wasn't particularly interested in the base building system that they had there, nor am I really interested in it in terms of Fallout 76. You can construct walls and floors and ceilings and props and workshops and beds and other knickknacks and doodads to build a little house on the prairie for your very own. Other players can enter it, and I often use these bases as essentially free workbenches for me to repair my stuff and scrap my junk. The design of these bases, though, clashed immensely with the world around them. Oftentimes, bases would be put together in ways that made no sense architecturally or structurally. You would see player bases that were propped up and constructed in a way that you know there's no way they should actually be standing, which would directly oppose the buildings around them. It seems odd that this would be a stressed aspect of Fallout 76. If I had emerged from a vault and it was my job to reclaim the world, rebuild it, restore it to its former glory, then obviously I wouldn't construct with my own hands my own house. and shelter. Obviously, I would use all of the structures that already existed in the world, with solid walls and rooftops and doorways. Coming across player bases essentially just worked to remove me from the immersion of playing in Appalachia. Also, bases often were built up in locations where they could constantly farm enemies or take advantage of events if they occurred within an area. So, Fallout 76 is, in addition to being everything that it already is, and it wants to be a lot of things, also is a survival game. Though I would say it's a survival game in the most technical of definitions. It's survival diet, survival light, it's zero-calorie survival. Zero calories. It's barely even to a point in this game that it adds so little that the survival aspects of Fallout 76 really, they just seem to be an annoyance and a distraction more than an actually well-flushed-out mechanic around which the game flourishes. Little time's gonna be needed to explain this, as little time was probably given to its creation. Fallout 76 is a survival game in much the same way that, in much the same way that going to Walmart is a survival experience. Technically, you do have to eventually eat food and drink water in order to not die, but sustenance surrounds you everywhere, and as long as you have the presence of mind to reach out and grab it, you will survive. In Fallout 76, food and drink is everywhere. It is all over the place. It's not rare, it's not valuable, it is all over this supposed wasteland. The only time I even remember that I have to eat and drink is when a notification pops up that I need to do so, and I take a bite from whatever I have in my inventory at the time, which is basically a massive stack of canned dog food and purified water. Because I took the perk that triples the effect of dog food, which basically renders the game's entire survival system obsolete at level 8 and makes dog food a very effective healing item as well. In fact, canned dog food is the most consumed item in the entire game by all players. And by then, too, you can have the slow metabolizer and the dromedary perk, I don't know how to pronounce it, that makes food and drink satisfy an additional 25% for level. There you go. Whatever, right? Food and water are so easy to procure in this game that it almost feels like distracting busy work. You roll your eyes whenever you're notified you need to travel to your inventory screen and munch on whatever packed lunch you decided on. For a dangerous wasteland, survival from the elements and sustenance is so easy, I kind of wonder why they even went through the trouble to add it in. I think it would have been better to have food and drink not be mandatory, but give perks that would give bonuses to keeping your fullness above a certain level, which the game has now to a degree but could really be fleshed out and reworked, or maybe allowed players the ability to put a lot more focus on skills that allowed them to create food and drink items that would themselves confer bonuses to players instead of having players need to constantly stop and eat and drink to survive. Which is pointless busy work. Since you're constantly looting anyway, there's rarely ever a time when you aren't passing over food or water because you have enough or it'll just weigh you down too much. And besides, you'll always find it later anyway. You're never exactly wanting. Survival implies there's a sense of a looming threat, a subtle but omnipresent danger that comes with maintaining your precious body's capability. Survival implies a challenge, or a constant need to be aware of the consequences if it's ignored. But Fallout 76's survival is so easy, so watered down, that little would be lost if they let you just toggle it on and off so you don't have to face the constant interruptions that come from having to stop what you're doing and be reminded that video games aren't about enjoying yourself or overcoming challenges. But moving right along, my final note about Appalachia concerns the detonation of nuclear devices. It's a puzzling and odd aspect of the game, honestly. Something that just... I'm gonna be honest, it seems like more of a marketing ploy instead of a well-made or interesting actual mechanic for the game. But hey, you show a nuke blowing up on screen that players call in, and I guess some people will clap at anything these days. Nukes don't make sense in this world. If every player is supposed to be a resident of Fallout 76 who is tasked with rebuilding and restoring a wasteland, then it's doubly nonsensical. Why would you further destroy and irradiate the land you're tasked with rebuilding with a nuclear explosion? That's insane. It makes no sense. It's completely antithetical to what the narrative of Fallout 76 and the opening cinematic, the only cinematic, convey to the player. And why on earth would you kill the fellow denizens of Fallout 76? I mean, what a mess. It's ridiculous. Anyway, nukes happen about every once in a while on the map, and when it does, a quest will begin called Death from Above or something like that. The map will display a blast zone where the nuke will land, and after about 2 minutes, boom, it hits. The nuke transforms the area into a high-level irradiated zone where deadly enemies will spawn that can drop high-level loot and players can gather rare resources. The explosion from the nuke itself is... I'm talking about the animation for the explosion itself. I will just let this footage from IGN play that released back in October, because it is an excellent example of how awful the explosion looks. This looks awful, Bethesda. It looks terrible. Honestly, I think you hurt the appeal of the game by showing this to players because of how poorly it looks, considering that it is #current year, and we know that you can do just so much better. The game is worse for having this in it. It really does look worse than the megaton explosion from Fallout 3, which was released 10 years ago back in 2008. Man, Fallout 3. I have so many fond memories of playing Fallout 3, more than I will ever get from Fallout 76, I bet. Man, that came out 10 years ago. Jeez. Time flies when you're having fun. Fallout 76 was sold as a full $60 game when it launched. That's what Bethesda thought this game was worth. It's what they priced it as, and that is what it shall be judged as. Fallout 76 also has microtransactions, a fully priced $60 game with microtransactions. Not DLC, not expansion packs, microtransactions from day one. And this isn't a surprise. We all saw this coming with the addition of the Creation Club garbage, where they would charge money for mods that were otherwise completely free in order to squeeze even more money out of the consumers who loved their games. However, the amount of incredible greed displayed here in Fallout 76's Atomic Shop it's surprisingly bad. So, before we get into the shop itself, let's explain something before we begin. The in-game currency is the atom. You can obtain atoms by completing challenges for characters in the game. Some challenges are tied to your account and not per character, and can therefore only be unlocked a single time. They can relate to combat, or crafting, or looting, all kinds of actions. Kill these types of enemies, gather this much wood, complete this many events, etc., yada yada. In addition, though, there are both daily and weekly challenges that grant atoms upon completion. Every day, you can earn 50 atoms by completing the 5 challenges that you're presented with, and every week, you can complete 150 atoms worth of challenges. This means that there's the potential of gaining through weekly and daily challenges 400 atoms. You have to log in every day, you have to do every challenge every day, and you have to do this without fail for a maximum potential of 400 atoms a week, 7 days a week. So how much does an atom cost in real money? Well, 100 atoms equals $1. So if you bust your ass in Fallout 76 and do all of the stuff that I just listed, all the challenges, every single day without fail, every day, all the time, you can get $4 a week for microtransactions for all of that work. I currently, to give a scale here, I currently have 67 hours in the game at the time of me saying this, and I have played the game organically, without going purposefully out of my way to get challenges done just to get microtransaction dosh. After 67 hours, I have exactly $25 of atoms. Results may vary, but that is the number that I got. So keep that in mind as we proceed going through some of the items in the Atomic Shop. 67 hours toiling through this game, $25 of credit. Let's start small and say you just want to get some 2076 sunglasses. That will cost you $7.60. A single baseball cap will cost you $6. Want to buy an ugly camouflage pattern suit? $10. This Vault-Tec bomber jacket will also cost you $10, as will the poodle skirt. $10. The military officer uniform? That is $12. And the Starlet sniper outfit? $14. Oh, but you could buy far, far more than just some outfits or a few little accessories. You can buy things like poses for photo mode. This walking pose will cost you $1.50 for a walking pose. The tough girl pose, flexing your arm muscle, oh, that's $4. The rock out pose is $6. But if you just want to lie out, that'll cost you $6. I'm sorry. Want to just be able to sit down? Well, that's $1.50. And so is waving. Want to paint your metal armor the color of vomit? $8, please. Maybe you prefer leather armor and want to make it blue. That's $8. If you prefer combat armor, don't worry, you can color that blue as well for $8. But if you want to show the wasteland that you really like blue and yellow, then you can spend $18 on some skin for your power armor. Or maybe $18 on this power armor skin instead. But don't worry, a more believable camo pattern for your military armor will only be $14. I mentioned Mr. Matty Plays at the beginning of this video for his review on Fallout 76, but he also has another excellent video concerning the game, concerning the Atomic Shop particularly. Here's a clip from that video that I think you guys should watch, just to get the point across of how ridiculous Bethesda is these days.
Now, not everyone's going to consider this a huge deal or this shop predatory, and I don't feel everyone's going to share my point of view on this, but I still think it requires a discussion as we move forward into it, because Fallout 76 reuses so many of Fallout 4's assets to a borderline insulting amount in the base game that I found myself puzzled how Bethesda could feel okay with their decision in charging us for some of this stuff. So Juicehead had actually taken one for the team, and he bought some of these items from the Atomic Shop, like the Wildman Rags Greaser Jean and Jackets, Red Rocket Jumpsuit, and the Rocket Suit, comparing them to the Fallout 4 counterparts. And as you can see, for all of them, aside from some increased saturation in the Rocket Suit and some uplifting for the Greaser Jean and Jackets, overall these are pretty much identical, and Bethesda wants to charge you real money for this, because once again I highlight there comes a point in the life cycle of Fallout 76 where you really don't earn atoms at all, and about $5 worth of atoms per week can only get you so far.
The Atomic Shop presents us with a set of extremely overpriced items. Items that can, yes, be purchased through in-game rewards, but at the prices that Bethesda has set. Getting any substantive amount of goods from the microtransaction store would require an immense amount of work. Since there's an atom gain slowdown eventually as you complete challenges and have to resort to dailies and weeklies, I think it's pretty clear that Bethesda knew that you would quickly exhaust gained atoms on the few things you might actually fancy at the time, and then feel more compelled to spend real-world money on credits. And again, all of this for many reused assets from Fallout 4 and an already fully priced $60 game. The video by Mr. Matty Plays, from which I played a clip earlier, did highlight concerns with the state of mods and monetization that Bethesda are taking. What was once a company that had games that could essentially be modded is now definitely moving, as they have been already before, towards a method of monetizing that was once a free and open modding system. Bethesda wants even more of your money. They see the kind of popularity and drive that their community gives to modding, and they see just how excited players can be to try new mods or install favorites that they learn from friends. They want to make money off that. They want to charge you. Somehow. They want to find a way to take something that was once free and add even more to their coffers. I worry about the state of modding in the future when it comes to Bethesda titles. I think they've become an extremely greedy company. After all, Todd Howard himself said that modding in Fallout 76 will only be available on private servers. And I wouldn't be surprised if they only allow these private servers to be purchased through themselves. And looking past Fallout 76, who knows what the future holds for the once free and open realm of modding Bethesda titles. But I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be a bleak one. I think it would be foolish to ignore the trend that Bethesda has set. Oh, I think I'm done. I think I've covered just about everything that I feel I need to cover. I think I've said my piece. I think I've commented enough on this awful video game. What are we at now? 2.5 hours? Jeez. So much to go over, so much to discuss. And I know that there are things in this game that I could add to. I know there are aspects of this game that I haven't mentioned. You could go on and on and on about the failures of Fallout 76. As I tell people constantly who ask me, this game I almost want to recommend so that people can see how interestingly and bizarrely terrible it is, to see how the awfulness stacks upon itself in layers, to see in just how many ways it is poorly created. Make no mistake, Fallout 76 is a bad video game. I think it's terrible. Every time I get on to play this game, which was for the purpose of footage, really, I'm not going to be playing the game really anymore unless some serious changes are made. Every time I got on to get footage, I found myself finding new and interesting ways that the game didn't work properly. Broken animations, strange visual effects, glitches, bugs, AI issues. The list goes on and on and on. I think it is an awful video game. A terrible video game. Full of incompetence and poor design decisions, and while there are some good aspects of it, they are buried underneath the crap. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. Fallout is a beloved series by many, many people. A lot of people don't like the idea that a Fallout game is terrible. I think parallels between Fallout 76 and Star Wars The Last Jedi are somewhat appropriate. It's a beloved series that has had its high points and low points, and its most recent production has been very divisive and has caused a great loss of faith and a schism in the community, and is seen by many, many people to be an abysmal piece of work. And so, to those of you out there who are watching this, who got through 2.5 hours of me bitching about this game, if you like Fallout 76, I can understand why you might like it. I can understand what reason somebody might have for enjoying this game. I went through 67, 68-ish hours of this game. I got to level 50, 51. There were times when I could see it. When I could see how this game could be really good. That if Bethesda was a company who gave a shit, that Fallout 76 could have been so much better than what it was. Because the concept isn't undoable. But if you like this game, this isn't an attack on you. This is an attack on Bethesda's product. And in some ways, Bethesda themselves. And if you love the Fallout universe, do not allow your love of the Fallout universe and the Fallout brand to give you rose-tinted goggles through which you will look at Fallout 76. If you want the best for your series, if you want the best for the Fallout franchise in the future, then you cannot accept mediocrity. And you have to be vocal, and you have to resist these kinds of projects that are being released by Bethesda. You can't accept them. You have to call them out. Because if you don't, then they will not be incentivized to do better. I don't like that there are people who like this awful game. I wish everybody hated this game so that it would never be made again. So that a game this awful by a company that has become immensely greedy and cruel and just bafflingly combative to their community would learn their lesson. So while I don't like the idea that you might like this game, it's okay if you do. Just be honest about how shit this game is. And don't let the moments that you enjoy in Fallout 76 fool you into thinking that it is a good game. It took me a lot of work to make this video. This was by far the most difficult video I'd ever made. And I don't know too much about editing, but I learned a lot along the way. I've never done a video game review like this before, but I've learned a lot along the way. I have an insane amount of experience that I've gained from creating this video. And I hope that as it remains on YouTube into perpetuity, I can learn from it, and Bethesda can learn from it, and hopefully it will illustrate with my observations about the game how terrible it really is. Because I don't want Fallout to slowly pitter away into mediocrity. I don't want Fallout to become the next Star Wars. I don't want to happen to Fallout what happened to Mass Effect, what happened to Dragon Age. I hope you enjoyed this video, this long-ass video about Fallout 76. But I am looking forward to, with great optimism, what will hopefully be a very productive and enjoyable year on YouTube.